Here. lot of, people to come show up and for us to get our technical difficulties in line. A meeting of this nature would not be a good meeting if we didn't have technical difficulties. And we are in a situation. Actually, sure. Yeah. I think. It's a bit more, 10 minutes ago. Yeah. We're having issues with our PowerPoint. If we have to start without the PowerPoint being able to be on the screen for all of us who are here, and we'll just go off of the. Do you folks have the PowerPoint in your packets? Yes. Hello, everyone online. Thank you for being here. Hello, everyone in the room. the meeting of the HCR task force this Thursday, June 6th. And it's been a while since I've seen you folks, and I know I've heard that you folks had a great meeting the last time in the scenarios that were created by the Hawaii Paroling Authority, and the actual walking through what it feels like to go through that process. And so there's a few housekeeping for those of you who are in the room. Look at the race board behind you or in front of you. There are keys to the bathrooms that are right down or around the hallway. The men's is right down the hallway and the women's is around. So that's where you can get the keys and bring them back with you. And that's pretty much the housekeeping. Yeah. Apologize for the heat in the room. It's coming from me because of my stress right now. So just bear with me. I'll try and cool my internal temperature down. Or I can give you the excuse of, the session is almost over and we know where the budget happened in the budget for the building. So that's just trying to make this. No, it's okay. With that being said, just a friendly reminder, we have a subject that we want to talk about today. And as always, whenever we have this discussion here, it's so much of an honor for everyone who is from a different point in the justice system here at the table and online. And you bring a valuable part of that window to that point, to the discussion, and that you remember just to treat each other with aloha as we have these discussions, and the passion that you have from your perspective in the system. And with that being said, we're so happy we're at this particular point in time, and we're so happy for the two more housekeeping real quick, my apologies. Kara Kampani, who's here right now, is currently the acting oversight coordinator of the Hawaii Correctional System Oversight Commission. Our Kristen Johnson is currently on maternity leave. She had a baby boy about a month ago, so she will be out to early August. So any questions in the meantime as we move forward with the task force, Kara is our point of contact.
Any questions can come to me. Any concerns should be directed right to Mark. I'll take both.
And then also, once again, this journey that we're going through and we continue to go through is made possible with, a lot of the advice, consultation, and help of the Council of State Governments Justice Center, national organization. And Carl is currently that national expert that brings the expertise to us in what other systems and jurisdictions are doing, but also helping us assess and think through what's happening here in Hawaii and what may need to happen. So Carl and Sefria from the State Council, we just want to offer you folks a little aloha for the work that you're doing and helping Hawaii in this process. Carol will present those dates. Thank you. Yes, you can. A month ago, the commission held a public meeting on the island of Hawaii. And it was a beautiful day on the Big Island when we landed, see the tops of the volcanoes. And very, very beautiful day. People. We went to visit the Hawaii Community Correctional Center. And while we were in this community center, we could hear the thunder. And by the time we were leaving, it was literally a downpour. Yeah, and you couldn't see like 10 feet in front of you. And from the front gate to our car, we were soaked. We got to the airport and the airport was shut down because the lightning was hitting the airstrip. And so we got stuck there, and there was like 4 planes that's supposed to have gone to Honolulu that were just waiting. Some of them had people on top to come off, and some of them had people that just loaded that had to stay. So it was real interesting how you can have a beautiful day and then it changed all of a sudden. And the rains that we've been having lately. I recall a few weeks ago driving in Kailua, same thing. It's just downpour and you're upset because you got to go over the Pali, and going up the Pali when it's raining is crazy. But then when we went through the tunnels, it was a beautiful day in Honolulu, in Waikiki, sun shining and everything. So it's just amazing how you think how something's gonna occur and then something else happens, whether it's good or bad. Yeah, but that was the visual I wanted to tell you, and when we talk about change. You know, especially when it involves systems. Yeah, and I wanted you to be open-minded today, the window that you represent here on this task force, that what we present today is really just a big glob of clay on the table for our foundation of a discussion. Yeah, and the window that you bring is important, but also the understanding of the person next to you and what they see as well. If we really look for systemic change. Yeah, this is not a finger at one particular organization or one particular point in the system, but it's a beginning of how we can look at, from the commission's perspective, how do we look at our punitive system and how do we transform it into something that can be not what it is today. And so this may be a good foundation for us to have the discussion for what is going to be a journey of transformation for each window in the system as well as the system overall. So with no further ado, I'm going to present to you Carl, who's been remarkable.
Thank you, Joe. George, are you able to pull it up? We're not seeing it. And while that's happening, I want to echo Mark in a couple of ways. One, I think I said this before, but it really is an honor for me and for our group. And it's a privilege to get to engage with groups like this one, experts such as yourselves in your individual states and in your individual forms. A true privilege, and I don't ever let that escape my own consciousness. I'm very lucky to get to do what I get to do. I also want to stress that this is what I'm going to say today is about your system. It's not a critique of the professionalism or the intentions or the competence of the people around this table and other people that aren't people like Fred, Corey, Tommy, the folks that I've come to know in this process, who I have a lot of respect for and really think are doing good work. This isn't meant to point the finger at. It's a system critique, if you will. And as Mark said, anytime you present a new idea or a suggestion for change, the human reaction is to think about and to articulate, here's what I don't like about that. Here's why that's not going to work. And that's real. We all do it. We're all critical thinkers, and that's just the way our brains work. And so I don't want to discourage that, because in fact, I had a conversation with Tommy, for example, last week, and he raised several issues about this suggestion. And they were all good issues, they all made sense, and that's helpful. It helps to refine my own thinking, et cetera. But I also want to ask you all, if you can, to try to flip that around. A friend of mine told me once about learning. He wanted to be a cop. He wanted to be a stand-up cop, and he went to improv classes. And what they tell you in improv, and if you ever watch people do real good improv, what they're thinking is yes and. If someone throws something out, you don't want to shoot it down, because that defeats the creative process that you're engaged in. So that's a bit of a big ask here, and it's also kind of a trivial example. But I do want to ask folks to try to think about how could this be a better idea for how we do this, not just the magic side. I feel sure those will come up. So, first pushing the button. I have nothing. All right, for now, I'm going to resort to paper. Just leave that up. But, thank you, George. You can help me with this and see what we're doing. I'm going to turn to the second page, and I'll just keep announcing where I'm at. The second page is about the funding that makes this possible for me and my group. And I usually don't spend much time on this, but I want to just flag for you a really kind of an insider baseball issue is that we started this project. I contacted Aaron absolutely a year ago, and that's how we got involved in this. But we've been the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which bankrolls all of our justice reinvestment work, like the initiative that we did here in Hawaii a decade ago. they've been very generous with us, sort of dipping our toe in, if you will, in projects like this. And they've even set up, they created a new thing called the Justice Reinvestment Assessment Center, which is meant to be a place where states signal their interest in having some technical assistance along the lines of the JRI project. And did you make that happen?
We're trying to see. It won't work.
All right, I'm gonna, George, pay attention, and I'm just gonna say when I'm switching pages, so you have to.
You're the
follow
filling
along.
figure.
That ain't it. What's happening? That's. Stop advancing. Okay? I'm on page 2 for now. I just wanted to let you all know that BJA has approved this project fairly recently, even though it's been going on for a while, as under the rubric of that Justice Reinvestment Assessment Center, which for me is a nice sign that they are paying attention to this work and that they're at least open to the possibility that there might be further work that the Justice Center could do in Hawaii. I've been hopeful of that all this time, but I really enjoyed coming here, really enjoyed working with you all, and I've been hopeful that somehow this will, not directly, but that we might be able to have a foothold in Hawaii and be able to build on that and do some more work with Justice Center. So, all that to say, I'm not appreciative of being here. So advance the slide. We're going to talk about, as the agenda says, I'm going to circle back to some of the very first things I told you about the parole systems, but not in detail, but really to kind of isolate where Hawaii sort of sits in the landscape. And then focus in on the way the HPA model works, some legal structure and issues, a little bit of data analysis, and then essentially show you a slide that says some of the same things that advance warning that we sent you yesterday, that gets at the sort of bottom line suggestion. So page 4. Briefly, that's just the mandates summarized for the HCR 23, and we're on the very first mandate, study whether parole system models used by other states might be suited for the next page. So as you know, most states in the United States have parole and release as a feature of their system. It's actually, I'm going to have to caution myself here. Louisiana passed a law just a couple of months ago that I think switches them from a paroling state to a non-paroling state in all effect. They basically said no more paroling. They didn't change anything about their penal code. They just shut down paroling. So I think that to the extent that I classify Louisiana in this presentation as an indeterminate state, I think that's kind of up for debate. In my mind, I'm used to saying there's 34 paroling states and 16 determinate sentencing states. So that may be now 33 and 17, but for our purposes, that's the basic lay of the land. Hawaii is an indeterminate state and a state without sentencing guidelines.
So is Louisiana just releasing people without any supervision?
Well, they just changed the law and it can't be retroactive. So it's down the road. They're just holding people until they reach some acts. I think I need to study it better so I can be more definitive about
And they're
it.
one of those violent feeling states.
Well, they had, and we see it as kind of a rollback. They had a big JRI project that another technical assistance provider worked with them on. And this is a backlash, a rollback of those things and more. Concerns about crime, politics. Next page 6. When I first talked to you about other state systems, I mentioned a couple of states that I said were sort of comparable to Hawaii, but I've kind of refined that. I've really studied all the state systems in much more detail because of this project over the last 2 months. And with the help of a bunch of material by the Robina Institute, and concluded that Hawaii system is not completely unique. 6 other states listed here give the paroling authority some power over setting the minimum. What's unique about Hawaii is the hearing, the fact that it's done through a hearing. Several of these states, they use what I call fixed minimums, and either through regulations that the parole board adopts or otherwise. Actually, that's the only way. Well, Connecticut has this 50%, 85% differential, and that's in statute. Kentucky and Missouri both use fixed minimums, the fixed increment based on the maximum that triggers parole eligibility. So you've got these 6 other states. Hawaii is unusual in giving the paroling authority power over the minimum and unique in having that done through a hearing process. Okay, next slide. The most common features in paroling states are. I'm going to go to the next slide, George.
It's.
Most of these 34 states that have parole have some form of these 2 important junctures in every sentence, right? Each sentence contains a point in time at which people become eligible, a minimum, and each sentence contains a point in time prior to the end of the sentence where people are pushed out of prison, regardless of the parole release, mandatory release to supervision, typically based on some kind of good time or earned time that racks up over time and pushes people out. 75, 85, something like that, some high percentage of the total sentence, people get pushed out the door and put under supervision with the idea that that's better than people walking out of maybe administrative segregation straight to the streets with no oversight whatsoever.
What is that, irrespective of misconduct or completion of programs?
It is not. If it's driven by time, if it's driven by a good time or earned time policy, the corrections agency has the power to pull that back. The corrections agency grants it. It's never a paroling agency. So it's always DOC or DCR. They grant it and they can take it away through a disciplinary process, a major disciplinary case where time is taken away from them. Pretty infrequent that actually happens in practice. And that's the basic idea of most systems. There are three periods of time within the sentence. There's a period while you're serving your minimum and you hit the minimum date. There's a period while you're eligible to be released by the parole board. And then at some point that period ends because the time that you've accumulated one way or another and not lost triggers a release, not even a decision, a release to the street with supervision to complete reaching that discharge date. And of course, there are different rules in different states for what those increments are. There's varying effect of good time or earned time. Sometimes it affects the parole eligibility minimum. And sometimes it affects the mandatory release date, and sometimes it affects both. It just depends on the state. But those time earning ideas can have different effects in different states. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention about this. Yeah, let's go on. So I've got a map of the US here, and again, 34 paroling states. Okay, they're colored in blue, and both in dark blue and in light. So the dark blue states are states that in some way or another use what I'm referring to as fixed minimums, a percentage or a number that is keyed off the maximum sentence and creates the minimum eligibility for parole. So a very common feature in these systems you see in all the dark blue states, including Montana that's hash marked, and including Hawaii, which I'll mention a little bit more. There's some legal operation or some statutes that create a fixed minimum as a percentage of the maximum sentence. The light blue states on this map are the other states that have parole. Some of them do. Judges set, we talked about Pennsylvania and Michigan, where the judge sets the minimum and has to have some mathematical relationship to the maximum. It can't be more than twice, or it can't be more than 2/3 or something. So those are states that have a different approach. But again, the more common approach is to use fixed minimums for some or all of the prisons. It turns out that about 39 other states, Rovina says 40, and I think it's 39, but 39 or 40 other states use some form of good time to advance a mandatory release date. 5 states provide no good time and no earned time credit, and they span all the different models. Hawaii is one of those, Idaho and Montana are those, Wisconsin and Michigan. None of those states provide any kind of time earning status other than time itself. Nothing that whittles away at a parole date or an against what it is. This,
For the states that have no parole, what happens?
the gray states on this map, typically, let's say North Carolina. North Carolina has sentencing guidelines. And they have a very tight sentencing system, and people get sent to prison for a fixed period of time, and it can be lowered by about 10 or 15%, and that's it. There's no parole release decision. It's all about earning time, but it's very minimal amounts of earning time, 6 days a month or something. And so someone can get out before the absolute end of their sentence, and they usually do. And again, that same idea of releasing people to supervision, but it's not a parole release decision. It's just,
Oh, so they're still supervised,
they're still supervised.
even though it says no parole.
Right, parole means parole release, not parole supervision. Thank you for asking that, because that's often misunderstood. Yeah, I mean parole release as a decision point.
What we call those 5 states you mentioned that don't have a parole release, or don't have a good time credit program. Right. So do those parole boards like in Hawaii have the ability to reduce minimum terms? Because Hawaii had, but we don't do the time credit system, but the parole board, once a person serves 1/3 of the longest minimum term, right, they're able to apply for reduction in minimum.
I think that's unique to one. And the fact that the paroling authority is the only door out, right? No good time that pushes anything else to happen. In Hawaii, the paroling authority is the only game in town. It's the only mitigation of the length of the sentence. In other states where there is time, the corrections agency controls that and it provides another kind of lever that can drive.
Our legislature is repeatedly declined to have good time. Because of issues like sexist offenders, users, particularly well situated to have an easy time in prison.
The other problem with good time is that legislators won't fund it. Good time programs require a lot of staff. Day by day calculations, right? As inmates earn and lose time. And as the Supreme Court has said, that's a liberty interest. That's the due process.
If it affects the release.
Yes. So obviously inmates, they challenge every law, every potential loss. So, we pointed out to the legislature many times that if you're going to have this program, you better be ready to fund it properly.
Also, that's not in my experience. If it's a very staff intensive notion. I mean, the system I grew up in Texas, it's long, it's been there for decades. And it's a computer program for the most part. It's just crediting people time because they didn't get in trouble. And to some extent, many states, including Texas, use, so good time is like Tommy has described it. It's time for not getting in trouble. It's just whittling away at your time to serve. Earned time is usually you finish this program, so you get 60 extra days. You got your GED, so you get 60 days, those kinds of things. Same principle and the same effect on, or potential same effect on parole or on mandatory release, but usually smaller increments and more sort of directly motivational.
I think that's a problem here, that the legislature already called it good time credit program, it's really earned. And so unfortunately, that again requires more staff. And you just can't, there's no computer that can just do that.
I think the concern too with a program like that is you have two similarly situated inmates. They get the same violation. That one person loses 3 days and one person loses 5. So then it's seen as capricious and arbitrary in the application of the process itself. And that's where the litigation, I think. Okay.
Next page, please, page 9. And this is just to illuminate what I said earlier about Hawaii having fixed minimums. You have a couple of statutes at least. One is for repeat offenses and one is for the use of firearms. They're sentencing statutes. What they say is if you commit a class C and you have a prior class C and they qualify under this long list, then you're probably, instead of whatever the paroling authority was going to say, you have to serve 33% of the maximum. So for a class C, that's 20 months out of 5. And that's how, and it turns out both of these statutes work similarly, but the gun statute actually has higher percentages. It gets to 100% quite quickly. Like the repeat offense mandatory minimums. The way the statute's worded, it's in years and months, but if you map it out and like I did here, you see that for all class Cs, for all first priors, the increment is 33%, and then the next one is 67%. That's just the way it works. I'm curious about how much this is used in Hawaii because of your paroling system, and I don't have any information to illuminate that. I'm wondering how much this really happens in practice. Next slide, please. Yeah.
No, it sounded like if you're wondering that there were people in the room, Lisa Edamore represents, you know, the AGs and represents the Department of Public Safety and HPA. So.
Yeah, well, I'm here for purposes of this hearing on interim doctor. Adrian asked me to come to here for the.
Right, and we'll typically charge the gun stuff, you know, the repeat offender is often subject to the agreements for, so it's really hard to.
Well, and you know that the paroling authority can take that into account. So my guess is that there's a little incentive to pursue repeat offender status because it's a hassle, and you know someone else down the road is going to be thinking about that, right?
We still do that. And then the defense has some, not as much as it could be done, but the defense is something to sell their client to.
Right.
Reduce it. But the paroling authority may go well beyond that, right?
Okay, so summarizing what I've just told you, the HPA's authority is uncommon, but not completely using a hearing to establish the minimum issue. About 2/3 of the states that have parole limits, including Hawaii, have some fixed minimums for defining when people are going to parole. Hawaii is one of 5 states that doesn't use any good time to earn time. And 39 other states use some system like that. It gives the corrections agency, separate from parole, the discretion to advance either a mandatory release or a parole eligibility rate. Actually, to be clear, the 39 other states reference is all about mandatory release. So this is a factoid that Rabina looked it up and pointed out to me. But that's just a really common feature of all the school states. And finally, Hawaii already uses fixed minimums for some circumstances. It's not a completely foreign concept. Next slide. We'll go quickly on the HPA model. I want to talk about the statutory framework and some data analysis. Keep going, George. In the correction statutes, chapter 353 is the sort of core statute, what I call the organic statute that defines the Hawaii Paroling Authority. It sets out most of its duties and says that the paroling authority is the central paroling authority of the state. And our main job is to consider for parole all committed persons except people that have life left. Right, so that's the core mandate mission. Then you go over to chapter 706, which is called disposition of convicted felons, I think. So everything in chapter 706 is about sentencing and parole and probation, that kind of stuff. And 706.669 is the key statute. I'm on the next page, George. There's the key statute governing this HPA minimum setting process. And we went through these statutes in a little more in detail a couple of meetings today. But I did want to just point you back to this sort of governing authority that says the paroling authority fixes the minimum term of the prisoner and is to have guidelines for the uniform determination of minimum sentences. And as it turns out, you look at a lot of other statutes in 706 and they cross-reference that. They say that even though we're saying this here, 706.669 controls, or at least in one instance, it says notwithstanding that statute, this is the way it works. So there's some conversation going on among the sentencing statutes that calls out this procedure, refers to it, and defers to it in those instances. Next slide. Page 14. And again, this is kind of a repeat of what we showed you some months ago. The Paroling Authority's 1989 manual, which is still online, and basically describes 3 levels that people will be categorized into. I'm using the term mitigated and aggravated to describe level 1 and level 3. if you read through the manual, you would see why I say that. That's the way it reads. Level 2 is kind of a plain vanilla version of the way the person committed the offense, etc. Level 1 is a better version, a version that depicts someone who's less culpable and less punishment worthy. Level 3 depicts someone who is more punishment worthy, more culpable, etc. And the manual spells out that some of these things are matters of individual interpretation and perception. They cannot be completely objective. They are subjective, essentially. And you have to be kind of in the know in the paroling authority, the second excerpt. They require an awareness and knowledge by the members of the way that they've done things in the past. Essentially, here's what we did with a person like this. And we're going to talk about data in a minute, but I would tell you that I think you can kind of see that in the data. You can see a degree of uniformity in what's happening over time. There's some variation in that, but you can see if you just scan through this year's annual report. They have a very, and by the way, the annual report this year is so much better than previous annual reports. It's a huge improvement. So kudos to Corey and Fred. It's just a better document. But if you scan through, there's a very detailed table 1 in the annual report that shows you all the minimums that were set. And it even shows you the kind of range around which, like, 3-year range around a 6-year minimum. So you can guess that meant that somebody got a 5-year minimum and somebody got a 7-year minimum. There's some kind of a bell curve around how that minimum works. But if you scan through that table, you'll see that you can pretty much tell what offense level, what class an offense is by looking at the minimums they can set. If there's a 3, that's a 5-year maximum. That's a very typical, hovering right around 3 years, or 60% of the maximum. That's a typical HPA minimum to be set. And it gets a little more squishy as you get into higher numbers, but you can really see a sense of uniformity. Next page. I want to shift over to a little bit of legal analysis. And for me, this is a really important part of this. I'm on page 18. Well, a while back, Fred and Corey provided to us the manual that they use. I think it's an internal document. I don't think it's on the web. But the manual included a list of cases that have affected the minimum setting process, which is a good practice to just remind people there's some history here. There's courts that told us we got to do things a certain way. And so they're spelling out the cases. And I hope that I'm helping the HPA out, because I took that list, I read all those cases, and I kept going, because those cases stopped at about 2017. And there's a handful of 2019. There's a handful of 2019 cases of a similar sort, where the minimum setting is kind of being policed by the courts. So an inmate will use a Rule 40, essentially habeas petition, to raise a question about the way their minimum is set. And the courts have weighed in from time to time. If they find that judicial intervention is appropriate because the HPA has failed to exercise discretion or acted arbitrarily or capriciously, that's when the courts are going to weigh. And in fact, they have in a number of cases. And the general theme of this, and I'm not going to belabor these, but the general theme is basically requiring some pretty fundamental due process. You have to tell the person about negative information. One Daily Guards was a big case about that. And other cases that say, look, HBA, you have to tell us why you put this person in this category. There's got to be some description of the factors that were in your heads when you said this is a level 3 person, or you max them out altogether. You set their minimum at their maximum. You have to explain what the thought process is in some way. You have to use these factors you've listed to tell us why you're doing that, so we can have some way to evaluate whether that's right. So that's the general idea of this kind of case law. Again, hopefully this will be a helpful document to maybe use for future approval. The one issue that hasn't yet, well, it hasn't reached the Hawaii Supreme Court, and that is something I've alluded to before. Judge Seuss is not here, but he raised this in the very first meeting. There's this line of cases starting in 2000, U.S. Supreme Court cases, that basically say if there's a sentencing factor that increases the minimum sentence or increases the maximum sentence, you gotta give the person a way to get to a jury. That's gotta be determined by, beyond a reasonable doubt, by a jury, if the person wants that. If they want to avail themselves of a jury under the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution. You have to make that possible. So this picture is meant to show you a hypothetical sentence, a sentence for a crime that's 1 to 10 years. If there was some factor that increased the minimum, so it's 2 to 10, or some factor that increased the maximum, so it's 1 to 12, those sorts of changes in the sentencing array, driven by facts that are about the way the person committed the offense generally. And that requires you to have a system that gives people the right to get to a jury. And so the bottom of this slide is the very boiling down what was going on in 4 different Supreme Court cases where they found a violation of the right to a jury. The defendant had a hate crime motivation. That was the first case. This is called the Apprendi Revolution to the lawyers. Apprendi was about a hate crime motivation. The defendant had a bunch more crack than the jury found him guilty of, and the judge increased the punishment based on thinking that there was more crack in play. That was Booker versus United States, which undermined the U.S. sentencing guidelines and made them advisory only instead of mandatory. The defendant acted with deliberate cruelty. That was Blakely, which affected the Washington State sentencing guidelines. It was a domestic violence case, and the maximum punishment was greater because there was a determination by the judge that the defendant acted with deliberate cruelty. And then finally, in Aline, which is the case that talks about raising the minimum, 2016, the defendant was deemed under the federal sentencing guidelines to be an organizer, leader, manager, supervisor, a kingpin, if you will, in the criminal activity. So those are the kinds of issues that the Supreme Court has said there's a problem here with judges making these findings instead of juries. So on the next page, I want you to take a look at the aggravating guideline factors for level 3 under the HCR guidelines. The offender displayed a callous or cruel disregard for the safety and welfare of others. The offense was committed against the elderly. The offense involved a substantial quantity of drugs. The actions seemed to indicate a substantial role as the instigator of the beating. Very similar descriptions of how things are happening, how bad people are doing bad things. And in the paroling authority's guidelines. So that's why I feel like this is a troubling issue. That your system completely sidesteps this right to a jury issue by saying, hey, that's not the judge or the jury, that's the paroling authority.
No, but the statute allows the paroling authority to set a minimum term up to the maximum term. That's clear in statute.
That doesn't mean it's constitutional. That's my point.
But actually, I think your case law overlooks what the current status is in the state.
I
The
think
Hawaii Supreme Court has already denied cert in multiple cases where inmates have raised this very issue. They argued about Apprendi and Aline applying to HBA. And the ICA has totally ruled that.
yeah,
it's not
I read those cases. Weber was the most recent.
Oh, well, Drazen versus State
Drazen.
is Star versus State, which is not included in the minutes.
It isn't, it should be.
I don't think, so. But
I've read those cases.
yeah, in both of those cases were the requests for cert were denied by the Hawaii Supreme Court. So the Hawaii Supreme Court has declined to review this issue. The ICA has explicitly ruled that Apprendi does not apply. And actually, I've done a review of Aline through the national case law. And I've yet to find a case that holds that Aline applies to paroling decisions. In fact, in Blakely, they made an exception. They said Aline does not apply to parole decisions. It does apply to mandatory minimum decisions. And in the Hawaii case law, the Hawaii Supreme Court has said that in Flubacher and another case, that Aline does apply to mandatory minimum set by the court. So say use of a firearm or, victimizing elderly, that sort of thing. I think sometimes all was, I can't remember what the.
But I think Carl's saying that may all be true. It still may be wrong.
Sure, no, but you're saying.
But I don't think this.
That's why I'm not saying your system is unconstitutional, because only a court can say that.
Right.
I'm saying it should have
It's
raised
an
this
issue,
question.
yeah. But ironically, the US Supreme Court now might say,
Yeah.
given the makeup of the US Supreme
And
Court.
the US
leave it
Supreme Court
alone.
also issued the decision in US versus Camden, which I just looked at. It's a crazy decision. There are three separate opinions issued by three separate groups of justices. But in that case, basically the core issue that everyone agreed on was that convene does not apply to parole decisions under the federal system. So again, I know you're thinking this is an issue, but in this state so far, and I certainly acknowledge the Hawaii Supreme Court's ability to reach back and change precedent. But in this state, that is not an issue. And so far, in national terms and federal courts, the US Supreme Court has not found fit to apply it. And I've not found a circuit court that will apply it to parole decisions.
But Paul, you're talking about minimum setting here, not parole decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's been no distinction made between parole decisions and minimum decisions.
Well, and Hawaii's the only state that does it like this, so they're the only person who come up.
Right.
But again,
Yes, I appreciate
Yeah.
your,
so although, certainly I can, in the future, who knows what will happen. As Mr. Hall points out, that given the way the US Supreme Court is going, I don't think they're gonna find that it applies to minimum decisions either. So,
but at the same time, I think it shows that it's trouble. I think it's showing you that there's something about this system that's really different than every other system in a way that's not good, essentially, but it's trouble. So finally, on this point, the next slide, you also have a thing called extended sentences, which means the maximum is going to go up. And your Supreme Court some years ago realized back in 2006, I think, 2007, that the extended sentence regimen in your system was violating this doctrine. Because it's the same kind of factors. Defendant's a professional criminal, a multiple offender against the elderly, hate crime offender. Those sorts of criteria are spelled out and defined further in statute, I should say. It's not just these three descriptions. Those are spelled out in statute, and the Supreme Court came to realize, and then the legislature quickly took action to change the extended sentence regimen so that this right to a jury issue is resolved. So that people have a process that's spelled out on the book so they can get to a jury if they really think that they should, they probably hardly ever do. But that a very similar list of criteria is already acknowledged in Hawaii as triggering this issue, right?
I actually wanted to say something, is that because I think this PowerPoint that is being used as sort of a foundation or a basis for us to make a decision, and that something that doesn't clearly apply to our state, and the fact that you've said that this is a troubling system. I feel like your role in CSG is not to identify potential problems that don't exist and comment on how, at least to provide us with guidance as opposed to that, to tell us that this is a troubling system and make the recommendation that is for the people that were selected by the legislature.
So the only guidance I'm allowed to give you is positive, is not.
No, I'm just saying that I think that you're saying, and I'm assuming this will go to legislators and this will go to the LRB as a basis for what the decision is to say that there is a legal problem in Hawaii with this. And I think that that's clearly, at this point in time, not the case. We can only, we can say that lots of different things can happen. And so I think also that your comment that this is a troubling system is, I feel like that CSG is here to provide us with information so that the people who are selected by the legislature can make a recommendation, which is what the resolution says, as opposed to making a conclusion about the value of the system.
Well, would we as a task force determine what goes forward to the legislature and what does not? Yes, but how will we do that, by vote at some point?
The PowerPoint right now is for us to have a more discussion. For the decision.
No, I understand.
And once we get to that point, then we determine how.
Okay. Carl, I was a little bit troubled too by you stating that the troubling system. I don't understand what's troubling about it. If the Hawaii Supreme Court has upheld decisions, the ICA, well, the ICA has upheld certain decisions. And the Hawaii Supreme Court has, well, like I said, it may not make it constitutional naturally, but what exactly is troubling because of its work? And even these court decisions here, I can tell you, each of these court decisions, that had to do with minimum terms, it helped HPA refine its process. Absolutely. And it helped them address hookahs that they were not aware of, so it wasn't done deliberately. And so it helped HPA actually come out what I thought, which was more meaningful decisions that addressed the valid concerns that offenders brought up to the court. So the court's decisions actually provided guidance to the HPA on how to narrow in and focus in and move forward. Exactly, right? I totally agree with that. Okay.
And to the extent that I've overstepped by saying it's troubling, I'm sorry, but to me, it's an issue for these reasons stated in these 3 pages. It looks to me like your system sidesteps a constitutional term. And I'm a constitutional guy, that troubles me. So I'm sorry, that's just an observation. And there's lots more conversation to come. Page 19. This is a quick reference to the mock hearings where we got the secretary of the prison. Which was really, you missed it, Mark, but it was really a helpful exercise. Really illuminated the way things work. And these are just some sort of, for me, the big takeaways. I really appreciated the way that HPA, George, you're on the slide, on the wrong slide. Oh, I see why you're on 19. I'm on. Well, anyway. Can you back up one, George? Yeah. Really nice to see the way that the members, Gene and Judge Town, former member, Fred, the way that they interacted with the council and the people who were subject to the hearing. It was a very it was a courteous process. I have to tell you, I've seen parole boards that didn't act quite that way. And it was refreshing to see that kind of interaction. And I think I think there's something really valuable about that aspect of your system. I want to come back around with this, but that interaction with the person in prison, and the way that, there's almost kind of a coaching and an encouragement and what we thinking, I think that's helpful. It's like Judge Allen in court. I mean, that black robe phenomenon of having a person in authority who's paying attention, cares about what's happening to you. That's what the encouraging part of the system.
Well, and I and others, I think, didn't know all of happened at those hearings. And I've been at those hearings, but I mean, the interaction between the board members and the defendant, because none of that happens, of course. Usually their counsel don't say anything because, appeals and prosecutors can hear it. Whereas this back and forth between the paroling authority and the defendant is really rich. And hearing from the victim advocates that it's much calmer for them. They don't have the defendant's family giving them a stink eye in the court. It's so public, the press is there. So many of them would rather go to a paroling authority here to go to court. I had never heard that. So that was very helpful.
And the guideline factors, it was nice to see this. So the defense lawyer really started this by kind of framing her argument, using the guidelines as a go by, which was helpful. And it became clear that these guideline factors obviously point in different directions. That can be mitigating or aggravating considerations, and all in one case, right? Corey's case pointed out that there can really be some delays in the minimum setting process because there's interplay. Of course, I think if you read some case law and you can see the courts are thinking about what the HPA is doing. In these mock hearings, you can see the HPA thinking about what the courts are doing and the fact that something was on appeal. And so the defendant is saying, I'm not going to talk. That's built into your system because there's this potential for. And finally, this came out because of a question. I don't remember who asked it, but it might be you, Judge Allen, but and I'm sorry that you'll always be Judge Allen. That Fred was very clear. He said, this is about punishment. It is not about where the person is going to go. That's Tommy's job. That's not, where they're going to go, what kind of program they're going to get, what they need. That's not the point. We are deciding punishment, and that goes back for me. To the Sixth Amendment issue, we're deciding that the way this person did what they did means they deserve X. That's, those things go together, it's all about punishment.
But the HPA also considers what the person's done before and after the incident, like gotten programs, made efforts in favor of education. So there are mitigating factors and extenuating factors the HPA considers. And I think the beauty of the minimum term process is the interaction that Steve mentioned. And the fact that you have a fresh set of eyes looking at the case and there's interaction and the victims have the opportunity to come in and provide a statement. Prosecutor has an opportunity to present their case or send a letter, and the HPA has interactions with the legal counsel and the inmate in the process. And they're looking at, hopefully, they don't wait to decide. And they're talking to the inmate, right, as a victim.
I would like to add though that I wasn't here for the mock hearings. Jen Lowenfeld from the office was here. They are not always conducted in a courteous manner. It depends on the board members who are present. So that has been one of our concerns regarding the lack of consistency. Because it really depends which composition of 3 members you have. Who is the acting chair at that point? If Fred is not there, for example. I've gone through like 4 or 5 different HPA chairs and different compositions of board members throughout the years. And I will tell you, it varies a lot. And, you know, ideally it would be like the situation described in your mock, right? Even currently, we are experiencing something contrary to that.
I think specifically speaking for HPA, that specific person who will be referred to is no longer on the board.
Yeah.
That's why we just brought on 2 new board members, so.
Also, I mean, yeah, the 2 new board members I think are great. But past members as well. So it really depends who you get on there. We've had defense counsel on the board who have been just as discourteous to our clients as persons who are former probation officers, for example, who are more on the law enforcement side. So it really, really depends. But you know, and just to say that, you know, in general, I would say they are pretty courteous. I think Fred is very good at directing, you know, the board members, but sometimes, and in the past, we've had really bad compositions of all members being very unprofessional. You know, so that was our concern, one of our concerns about the lack of consistency.
Well, and again, that's not all that unusual. I've seen boards around the country and they're pretty abrasive and they're mean to be abrasive. It's not a civil arrangement.
And we can't send them all.
Fred's on the way out. So let's look at a little bit of data. This is HPA's data from their annual report. And what they show is that this is just looking at averages, and it's looking at a group of offenses that are voluminous enough that you can actually talk about averages and sensitive manslaughter, etc. And what you see is this is a span over time. I'm going to show you over time in a second. But where this is all settling out is right up at the bottom of level 3. The average minimum that's being set for Class A's is 52% of the maximum. The average for Class B's is 56% of the maximum. The average for Class C's is 62% of the maximum. This goes back to what I said a minute ago. If you scan the annual report and just look down the column at the average minimums, this is the pattern. They're all 50. There's a couple of exceptions that are less than 50% of the maximum. But for the most part, it's all in the 50, 65, 70% range of the maximum that the minimum is being set. So you don't have fixed minimums, but to the extent that the HPA is acting kind of uniformly and remembering what they've done in the past, as they talk about in their manual, this is the uniformity. The uniformity is around maximums that are more than half of the minimum.
But this doesn't take into account the reductive minimum process, right?
That's a pretty small process, but you're right, it doesn't take 13%. I mean, it's a small number of people where that's actually granted. It's a pretty small number where it even gets to the HPA. But that's true. And I assume that's true in terms of the data we're looking at, that these are minimums that are set initially rather than some roll around to a future. I don't know how they would even depict that in name, but you're right, that this is exclusive of any reduced. The next page shows, for by offense, and these are just a set of class B offenses: assault first degree, burglary first degree, sexual assault second degree, PBD second degree. And just shows you those averages over time. And you can see they kind of bounce around. And they are generally increasing. So this trend of getting up there, and you can even gauge percentages. If you look at this, because it's a 10-year scale. There's one instance on there promoting dangerous drugs in 2018. The average was less than 50%. It's about 35%. But other than that, we're talking 40, 50, 60, 70% minimums. That's what they are. They can vary over time, and they do seem to be at least a little bit creeping up over time in most instances. They certainly are capable of creeping up.
I need a question. So as the prison population has been reduced, which it has after JRI happened in 2012, the prison population has been reduced. So does that mean that the people who are going to come out on parole are more serious offenders? So you would anticipate that there would be an increase because you're looking at a population that's in danger.
I don't think we know that. I mean, I think that's a possibility scenario, but I don't think we know that. This slide, it really is lifting up some things that we found years ago. So this is dated information, but I think it's relevant. And one of the reasons it's relevant is because the very last statement out here, the current annual report, the one I've been extolling, depicts 447 parole grants out of 1,685 parole considerations. I think that's how y'all would create a parole approval. I think that's how. My guess is that's how one could calculate it, and that's about 27%. Something. That's a pretty low parole approval, and that's current. One critique of the annual report for is that it doesn't just show the rate; it tells you all raw numbers without ever saying here's the rate. And that would be helpful to know that you all think of the rate as that one numerator, one denominator. I was not sure that this was the right way to depict what's happening, but it is a way based on. But circling back to the earlier, the JRI announced, we were focused not on minimums at all, only on parole release as a function. And seeing this, and that the parole approval rate was dropping pretty precipitously over time, 40% down to 34% over the span of time in question. And most of the denials was because people had completed programs. And the volume of people in prison beyond their minimum was increasing by 77%. And at the same time, the volume of people that were maxing out, leaving prison without a parole decision, just flat out grew by 104%. This is another issue for me with the public information that we have. I can't tell you what the max out number is now. I don't think it's available. Tommy publishes prison population report. It doesn't tell you how many people are discharging from prison. And I don't think the parole HBA documents. I think that's an important metric for people to understand about the system. But historically, at least, and my guess is still current, maxing out happens with some frequency, and it was growing back when this was happening. And in fact, the people that were maxing out, their risk level was increasing. So the paroling, what that means is the paroling authorities are unwilling to release someone on parole and take that risk, essentially, which is understandable. But that means they reach their maximum and they get out. What's going to happen. And in fact, when we were able to analyze this so many years ago, the rearrest rates for people that were maxing out doubled those put on rules had that effective transition. So that, I think that's a continuing issue. But all of this is to say, in spite of the fact that the HPA sets the minimum in the first place at 50, 60, 70% of the maximum, the parole approval is really low. I mean, 40% is a normal parole approval. As I look around and do this work around the country, I see, 40, 45%. That's a typical parole approval rate. So your rate is low in spite of setting the minimum. To me, that's striking.
Well, I think some things that are consideration. One being that a lot of the offenders we have in custody are not first time offenders.
Oh, yeah.
We have some with multiple felony offenses who've been on probation and resentence. Then by the time they come to us, like it's not uncommon, unfortunately, to see someone who has a class C felony. A few of them, who've been on probation for 7 or 8 years. By the time they come, by the time the courts resentence them to prison, they've got, close to 3 years of intermittent jail time. And so now HPA has 18 months to wait. And there's no way to get all the programs done. The other thing that this doesn't probably take into consideration is some of these maxed out have been paroled before and have absconded and have been paroled a second time, come back and have been just maxed out in prison. And it also doesn't take into consideration the fact that when some of these guys come up on parole, it's because they themselves have delayed their participation in programs due to their own decisions they've made and misconducts in the facility. And I'm not on the phone, but if I was, why would I parole someone when they can't follow the rules in the prison, more or less in society where there's less supervision, less control?
Lots of.
Yeah, so I just want to point out, like Tommy said, the reasons why people are maxing out, as Tommy pointed out, is all there. It could be that the HPA set their minimums at the maximum. And then you got to drill down as to why they did that. Or it could be, like Tommy said, the person was already on parole and he violated it, and he's coming back and, he's come back a couple of times and the parole board just throws it to him and says, well, obviously, they're just not ready for parole, you can't take a chance of parole. So the numbers that you point out for people maxing out could be for all sorts of different issues. And unfortunately, you can't just say, change the system and that'll take care of it. It's not gonna do it.
Oh, and it's an issue in many states. I'm working in West Virginia right now, and they're kind of struggling with that as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, what they talk about is people who say, I just want to do my time and get out.
Yeah.
I don't want to report to anybody when I get out. I don't want to go see that parole board. I just want to do
Some
my
people,
time.
yeah, that's sad.
Yeah,
because,
that's an attitude.
yeah, they don't want to do programs, they just want to sit around and wait until their time is up.
Well, here's another example. Most of the offenders come into class C felony sex offenses will max out because they won't do SOT. They refuse to do it.
They say, they'll just do their time and vote.
Well, and they have to admit things they don't want to admit to. So they have
But the
it's
class
not
B
the
is,
Yeah.
because they don't want to do 10.
That is correct.
At least that's the numbers that, whatever the guy who used to run the sex offender treatment program, it was a stark difference. It was like a third did it for C's, 2/3 did it for B's. Sex.
As a sense, yeah, the sentence gets longer.
Yeah, so
Change your mind.
they don't want to do an over 10, is it?
Oh,
They
they
don't
want
want
it,
to.
yeah. So, but the thing is, one of the reasons you point out here is that 60% of denials are failure to complete our program. Part of that is because people refuse. And part of that is because there's not enough programs.
And that's certainly something that we want to stress as part of this, in any communication with the legislature. We recognize your systems under resourced. And unfortunately, it's undermanned as well. And that's a bigger problem. Money notwithstanding. But we would certainly be encouraging in any conversation about this stuff, that Tommy needs more resources. And I saw a bill in the session of the government last year. It looked like the minority party in Hawaii was actually recognizing that as well. We need to do more to try to change people's behavior. So we need to put more into it. To change people's behavior. And that's a message.
Carl, could I add something to you, about the annual report?
Yeah.
That 1,600 could potentially be high, or looks high, because what Fred has done since he came on board is they'll short set up meetings. They may see the same offender 2 to 3 times a year.
Right.
Because, we're gonna deny it today, come back in 3 months, so you can complete the program. They may come back in 3 months and then they're not done.
Which is
That's
great.
why
That's good practice. But that's also why I want you guys to tell us what the parole giver is. I have to guess if this is the right way to take it, and I'm not sure. It sounds like maybe it's not, but that would be a good thing to. Because there's another denominator that I could have, if I don't remember how it's labeled, but it might be a better depiction. So. Next page. Let's say the number. And this is just a recap. Again, from my perspective, minimum setting is according to the guidelines themselves, it's explicitly subjective, and it has required to some extent court oversight. I do think that's waning. I should add, I chatted with someone in the Attorney General's office, and she told me that I told her about all these cases that she said it's getting better. We're not seeing the same thing. She's going, as you said, the system is learning from that experience. Which is great. I think the Hawaii system is sidestepping a constitutional requirement by moving this whole amount of punishment decision away from the judge and jury process altogether. Average minimums are higher than the mid-range and are increasing over time. And in fact, I'll embellish on this and remind you that they tend to be in the 50 to 60, 70% range. Half of the maximum is the norm. And parole release rates are low, despite the fact that HPA sets the minimum, which max outs. And although they're common now, they've been historically common. I would certainly want to add in a report draft that there are various reasons for that, because I think y'all are very good feeling about the reason. That's not just a dereliction of duty or something on the parole. I might suggest that. Okay, skip ahead a couple pages. We're now on the mandate to this board, to this group, to make recommendations about the existing process, right? There's maybe changing the status quo, and for now, I want to talk a little bit about what if we're going to keep the status quo? Is there anything that could be changed? And I will make a couple of suggestions. Okay. The next page shows a very quick summary of how I heard you all in this conversation. I hear the agencies and private victim advocates favoring the status quo. We like the way it works now. Less of a sense really from Judge Souza and other judges that I've talked to about this whole issue, but I do think it's safe to say judges feel unprepared for setting limits and concerned, as everyone is apparent, was about the potential inconsistencies of the judges saying that. So that's kind of off the table. Defense lawyers have said a few things, but the one that really stuck with me is actually when this bill to create this task force was produced, there was the public defender's office filed a statement supporting it and pointed out that this process that you're using has built-in delay. It keeps people from getting in the program as quickly as they could otherwise, as they might be able to. It's because you have to wait for the HPA to set a minimum before things start to really happen.
You know, one thing when I was talking to Cheryl about that, who used to be on the Paroling Authority, is if they have limited numbers of program spaces, they're not going to put the person, and they meet 5 months, say, after the sentence. And if that guy has a drug problem, they're not going to put them into drug treatment right away, because they finish in a year and then sit for 2 years before they get out. And so I had not thought of that aspect of it. They wait until this, at least part of the sentence is done, and Tommy could tell better of this, but because then it's at the end. You don't want a person going through and learning certain skills in rehab and then staying in prison.
Right, so we do a sequential phasing process with the program, so we do the assessment through the RAD process. That process determines the level of risk and needs for treatment. And then we look at the person's minimum term, how much time we have to work with them, and we put them in those programs, and Steve is right. We put them in substance treatment before they go to work, because what's bad for them is they finish RDAP and remain in just level 3, or cash population level 3, and we put them back in the general population. Then they tend to lose a lot of that information. So from our standpoint, we're looking at trying to do a cause relapse prevention as part of the resocialization process when they're going to go to the person. We have to tweak our system internally, but Steve is right. So we do have a method to our madness.
Well, it's all about timing. It's all about and the resources to be able to have those slots.
Correct, and Steve is also right. We don't have a lot of slots. So what we do is look at who is coming up first for TPD, and we prioritize those people for treatment. You're not gonna put somebody with a 20-year, 15-year minimum term in the treatment in year 3.
And then finally, community advocates, the folks that community advocates, I'll just leave it at that. The folks that communicate with you guys a lot. I've heard through you all and also through the community that kick this process off. That there's a perception out there that this process is arbitrary, untransparent. That people don't get it, they don't understand what's happening. They don't see how this, they don't get it, they don't see how this can be fair, essentially. That's a perception. So this is a very down and dirty summary of the kind of input I've got, and I hope it's accurate, at least as far as you go. It seems like, and I don't even mention here the prosecutors. Should. My perception is that prosecutors are, the main concern I've heard is about the potential for inconsistency if judges said that. There's been this thought thing going all through this, that the only alternative to the HPA is the judges. That's, as I'm about to say, not the only alternative. But people are, all the practitioners worry about giving that authority to the judges. That would be a big one.
Well, part of the concern there is that the Chief Justice won't dictate to the Chief Administrative Judges how to run their circuits. The Chief Administrative Judges won't dictate how the judges run their circuits. That's what he won't do. Absolutely, not just on, so you can get on every issue, and that's why you see that so much now in the judiciary. We have inconsistencies in applications, trials, all these other things. So it's a valid concern.
Coming from Texas, that's a familiar issue. Lots more judges, but there's a wild inconsistency because it's not a top down. Some states, Minnesota, it's top down. They tell them how to do it. Not in states like that.
Well, I thought in Texas they were elected.
They're elected. And they are kings and queens of equal dignity in their politics.
Okay.
Next page. And again, this is sort of assuming status quo scenario, and this is basically under any scenario. I think some things that have come out in this process that have to do with PSIs and judicial training, court security that we've heard again and again, and we really kind of got into this in the last meeting. That a lot of times PSI information, it's either not getting created in the first place, which may be a resource issue for the courts, at least in some circuits. And it's not making, sometimes it's not making its way to the HPA and to DCR. It's important information. It's like the key information gathering juncture in the justice system. And the legislature needs to understand that and make sure that that's something that happens as frequently as possible and that information follows. We also, I think Cheryl brought up that in your circuit, there's you guys are doing post-sentencing investigations to think about how to supervise someone. And I gather there's some either ambiguity or uncertainty about whether that information can leave the hands of the court system and be provided to the executive branch. I would suggest that's good information and that it ought to be made clear that that information can follow the system. I know Judge Sousa's not here. I know he was troubled to hear about what we've heard again today. The victims feel much more comfortable with the HPA process, feel uncomfortable in court. And I think there's reasons, a lot of reasons that they mentioned that have nothing to do with the individual judge. I'm pretty sure it has nothing to do with Judge Sousa. I think it's, but that was an uncomfortable reality to be. And I think the judicial branch ought to take that message.
And it isn't just in court, it's in the hallway, it's in the parking lot.
It's in the parking lot. Yeah, that's why I mentioned court security. There was a comment about just walking out of the court and being afraid. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we ought to be able to stage. So under any scenario, these are issues that I feel like came up in this process that need to be lifted up to.
Just to be clear, I think the statutes call for HPA and for the DCR and DSP to receive a copy of the PSI, right? For sure. Well, that's clear that we should be able.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with statute. I see a problem maybe with resources. It sounds like in some circuits, they just don't have enough probation officers to supervise and also do PSIs. That's not an uncommon problem.
Or it's being waived. Yeah.
Or it's being
I think that's,
Yeah. But if it's,
That was probably a big problem on the Neighbor Islands.
well, Fred's talked about how he's kind of dealt with that to some extent, but that's going to be a perpetual issue, I suspect.
Yeah, so Fred actually contacted me about us waiving PSI, especially on the Big Island. And the reason why, when I checked into it, was they had, I think, 2 probation officers. So it is a resource thing, because what happens then is if we say we want to wait for a PSI before the guy pleads and sentenced, then we're delaying plea for like months and months, often up to a year, I've heard. So instead, we waive PSI, we try and work out a good deal. Big Island in general is very deal centric. So most of our cases are dealt over there or, you know, dismissed. There's a process anyway by which they kind of run that system. So yeah, it is definitely a resource problem in terms of why PSI sometimes will actually waive PSI. And also sometimes, frankly, I mean, a PSA may not help us. You know.
Like you said, Big Island is deal centric, and mostly it's sentencing. They agree to a deal, no prison, probation, jail, 6 months, no need PSI. But frankly, I used to push for a PSI whenever the person went to prison, it's because of the rule for needs.
And then it helps the case managers, and that's the other side, because PSI has all this dynamic information on the person, their upbringing, education.
Yeah.
Previous
Information, restitution, all that stuff.
previous involvement in the justice system.
And in personnel, at least when I was there, probation tells me that it takes 8 weeks at least to get a PSI. So that delays sentencing time.
And even if they get probation the first time, that may get revoked, get sent to prison, so yeah. It's really helpful.
8 years down the line.
This page is circling back to a couple things I've mentioned. These are just my perceptions and suggestions about the way things are working now. Again, assuming the HBA continues its role of setting the it strikes me very odd that even when a judge mitigates the sentence for strong mitigating circumstances, under the statute, that the courts have allowed the HBA to go ahead to blow by that 7 different. I think that doesn't compute. And I don't know if the legislature understands that that's what happens, but one thing the legislature could clarify is that that a judicially mitigated mandatory minimum can't be increased by the HBA. That's the minimum. The judge said it. So that's one, I mean, that's a status quo suggestion that is essentially reversing baseline.
Effectively just giving judges the authority, you know, essentially removing the authority to do exactly what many people are concerned about happening. Population judges who
You already statute lets judges do this, but then the HBA overrides it.
when the legislature sets certain minimums in certain cases, and then those cases go to the HQA.
This statute allows a judge to mitigate a mandatory minimum, and if they do that, there's at least one case that I found where the HBA said, no, we're gonna set a higher minimum, and the court said, sure.
Because the statute allows them to send it up to the maximum, and that's been challenged all the time.
And that's my next point. And again, your Supreme Court has said that none of the laws on the books prohibit the HBA from setting a prisoner's minimum at the maximum, right? The court has said that. I'm suggesting that's weird, and that's defeating the idea of an indeterminate system. If just saying the minimum is the maximum, that's not an indeterminate. And the organic statute that governs the HPA tells the HPA to consider for parole all committed persons. Putting the minimum at the maximum is not considering a person for parole. It's blowing, it's pushing them all the way to the max. They could reduce it.
No, they can reduce it, but they can also, even if they don't reduce it, they get a full consideration in the month before the max out. And they can roll them at that time. Why should they do it 2 months? Statute says 1 month before.
Yeah. So, well, in any case, I would submit that these are things the legislature might want to look at. If the courts have decided about the way this process works, that may or may not really reflect, particularly in the second case, what the legislature is trying to tell you is being a good job is to consider for parole all committed persons. I think that would be reconciled if there was if the legislature prohibited the HPA from setting minimum. That opens a huge can of worms.
Oh, it
Yes.
does, it really does, because if you look at the time that HPA has set the minimum at the maximum, it's gonna be less than 3%. I mean, it's very, very low,
Sure,
very low.
sure.
Yeah, and those cases have been generally pretty heinous cases. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, and some of those are the ones that show up in this review.
yeah, I mean,
They're heinous cases.
yeah, those are the guys who file reports and so forth, because they have nothing to lose. They're not going to set.
And I'm just pointing out that to me, that's an inconsistency in your system. It's a system of parole where your minimum setting process is eliminated. For all intents and purposes, a month before discharge is.
I want to point out that mandatory minimums that the legislature has set up, they have different intentions. They have, you're trying to discourage use of firearms in commission of crimes. You're trying to discourage people from victimizing kids or elderly. There are very specific, audiences or classes that you're trying to protect or the things you're trying to deter. So it's not quite the same thing that the HPA is looking at. And so you can't, even though they're both of them involve minimums, they should be tied together. They have different purposes. And so I don't think you can, at least my opinion is that you cannot yoke them together and say, well, because the judge found the mandatory minimum should be reduced from repeat offender from, 1 year, 6 months to a year. Well, too bad, HPA is, limited to 1 year. I don't think that the purposes match up. That would just be my suggestion. You cannot go for it or tie the two different things together. You can certainly argue to the legislature that, HPA should be taking that into consideration. But the purposes are just too different, and there's two different,
Well, I get your point with regard to the purpose of a repeat offender statute and a gun statute. But I don't understand the thought process that even though the judge set the minimum under a very strict process that is subject to criticism because they're mitigating an otherwise long sentence, that's just an advisory. It seems to me the judges are entitled to the respect of that the one place where they're told they can set the minimum and it doesn't even matter.
So you're suggesting that HPA not be able to set a minimum higher than the court's minimum term?
Yes. If it's a mitigated minimum.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Because HPA's minimum term process is very unique, and it takes mitigating and extenuating circumstances into consideration that the court does not. If you look at the minimum term, it goes sit on the real minimum term hearing and see the back and forth. I mean, it's unique because it works. At least that's my position. I was the administrator of HPA for 16.5 years. Yeah, it's a refining process. And each of these court decisions help refine the process further and make the process, I think, better, to be honest. Yeah, much better.
And I think one of the things that's happening is the court is looking at the instant offense. Oh, in many cases, and the person may have a whole bunch of priors that are violent and everything else. And that's where we have problems, some of those. But that's true, for a lot of things, and we do have, there are other things that can be done with the classification system that might be delaying parole, even if the status quo is kept. And it might be worth it when this was written a long time ago, as you said, the guidelines, I think, and it was, I don't know if it was Georgiana Ewan, Dan Foley, whoever, but maybe they could go back, be tasked to go back and rewrite them. And it may reduce the number, because I think boys paroling, I mean, our minimums are pretty tough when you compare it to other states. The judges are lenient, but the paroling authority is tougher on that. So maybe that needs to be, with modern sensibilities, rewritten, and that would probably reduce the average sentence.
And I think you mentioned this early on, Steve, and the next page is meant to not, I don't want to attribute it to you, but you planted the idea in my mind that assuming a status quo continuation, what about putting a little more rigor into the guidelines themselves? And this is just a it's almost a goofy idea, but
Okay, we're going, for sure, two things. One was, so what happens when the court sets the minimum and the maximum? Because they do that as well. So you're saying that's unfair too? Because the courts have said 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, 20 out of 20. They've done that quite a bit
In rare cases.
in rare cases, yeah. And they've also done it consecutively. Particularly in this crimes. And then what Steve mentioned earlier is, we are looking at our classification system. We hired Dr. Janet Davidson to take a look, because I personally thought that our classification system is too harsh and people upstream for a longer period of time than it should, we should move down. And when you look at our minimum security facilities, a lot of our money is class A example at 50 and 60% respectively, when we really should be at 70%. So we take a look at the classification system and move them down super fast.
overclassifying, is that what?
I think that's what we're doing. And based on the Janet's preliminary report, we're fine on the jail population. But we may have deviated somewhere down the line, application of the LSA. So it's great.
Right, because if they're fighting, that's a major misconduct.
Yes.
And prison with people around and stuff, you get a lot more fights there than if you were outside, so. And I don't know how long it stays, months or something, they can't be considered for parole if they've got.
But it can't be considered programming at a certain classification like that. So what I think we need to do, I'll give you a classic example. If you have an escape tube, which is a walk away from a facility, right? You're not going over the fence, you can still come back and pass. You stay at higher level of custody 7 years. Even if you get convicted in the court, it's 5 years. So what does it stop this person from being a manager for 5 years? There's no light at the end of the tunnel. So we're changing that. So those are the kind of things we're going back again. The penalty stuff need to be changed.
And in those cases, then the person will become eligible for parole much later, for the programming.
Right. Next page. And again, this is based on what I think was Steve Ball's comment months ago, that maybe the guidelines could be refined. So this is one version of maybe an idea for that. And there's several things happening. One is, I've included the idea that the minimums should not be set at the maximum. So you'll see in the level 3 column, I crossed out the 50 and lowered it to 40, crossed out the 20 and lowered it to 60. Just on the principle that my sense that the minimum ought to not be the maximum. I've also included on this table a midpoint for each of these ranges. And the idea that came to me from case law. If you read the cases, they say point blank, the HPA is not starting in the middle and going up or down from there. And I kind of thought that's what was happening. You've got mitigating factors and aggravating factors. I thought that meant that we're going to assume this person's in the middle, and then we're going to go one way or the other from that based on the factors, based on these things that we spelled out or what's important. But that's not what's happening, and the courts have said that's not what has to happen. But it could be, there could be more rigor in the guidelines by saying, start at the midpoint and go from there and explain why you went up or down from there. This chart shows you a midpoint of each level. That might be a little crazy overkill. But if you started at the midpoint of 2.5 years for Class C offenses and had to go up or down from there, that would it would ameliorate the system a little bit. Instead of having averages of 3, 3.2, et cetera, you might have a bell curve that's all around that midpoint. You'd have more sense that some people are mitigated and some people are aggravated. There could be, it would look more like a system that's based on a bell curve essentially. Right now, the bell curve is skewed up towards the top end of its levels. So that's just one. I don't even like this idea anymore, but that's one version of the notion of providing more rigor and asking for more of an explanation, more thorough explanation of what's like one in sentencing guidelines systems is referred to as a departure from the guideline. An upward or downward departure.
I guess my question is, why would you want to start or have the presumption be the whole point of the HPA's hearing and the setting of minimums is that it's supposed to be individual. You know, I mean, although there's a inference or a presumption that is consistent. At the same time, you're also supposed to be looking at the person as an individual. And so, but if you're looking at just a bell curve, you're just saying, well, gotta have somebody at the bottom, gotta have somebody at the top, and, bunch of people in the middle. Regardless of whatever the fact circumstances are, the background, the history. And that, I think that's the problem I have with just looking for, an average.
I think I understand that, but the idea comes to me from reading the guidelines. The guidelines depict a sort of typical middle case, and then they tell you what it looks like to mitigate that case and what it looks like to aggravate that case. That's how they're spelled out. So that's how it came to me. That's the way it's depicted. But I understand what you're saying, that there's no reason to think that in nature, that's how people are gonna shake out.
I mean, that's the whole reason why you have, why it's not computerized, that's the whole reason why. Supposedly, you're supposed to tailor everything to each individual. You wanna give people, mitigating breaks and so forth, but if you're just gonna shove them into an average. That's the thing.
So, but I don't know that necessarily that this type of model would take away from that opportunity. And so, for example, what you're describing here, Carl, to me, is very similar to what the judges do in the state of Arizona, right? Where you start with a presumptive sentence for a certain classification of crime, and the judge then makes findings on specific factors on mitigating, aggravating, super aggravating factors, and it's sentenced within the range given those factors, right? So it's still individualized. In this instance, it would be the HPA. But just saying that this is our starting point. We have to find a certain number of mitigating factors to get a downward movement. We have to find a certain number of aggravating factors to get an upward movement.
Yeah, it's like I said,
It still could be
No,
individual.
I'm saying that, but I'm also saying that if your whole purpose of doing this is to come up with a bell curve, that's kind of torpedoes the idea of individual.
Well,
That's the thing, I mean,
Yeah.
there's always a tension between discretion and consistency, right?
Right.
So
And
that's the balance we're trying to get here.
And I think what, one of the things that, and I'm not necessarily advocating for this, I'm just trying to bring another voice to this. If you look at something like this, the opportunity to have. One of the things that we're all looking for is the best measure of certainty we can get for different reasons. We want consistency. Right? But we also want, for me, and understand, I don't come from the same background as say Pam and Martha do, but I've spent the majority of my career with victims throughout the entire process. And I find that I think one of their many frustrations with the system is when we describe this sentencing parameters to them, and they tell me, wait a minute, the judge is gonna give him 20 years tomorrow, but we still don't know how much he's gonna get. And I have to explain yes. And there could be a minimum set at he's getting out in 90 days, or it could be 20 years. And we're gonna have to go make those arguments and do that. So, if there's a system where we can sit down and say, hey, listen, the guy's getting 10 years, the parole board's gonna start with a 5-year minimum. But then we're all gonna have to make arguments to say whether or not you go above or below that. This is very interesting to me. And like I said, I'm not taking a position one way or another for anyone, but I think it's one thing that's worthy of further discussion.
Is it safe to say, Tommy, that a minimum is set at 5, that they may get out, or not get out?
It would have to be, mitigating circumstances for someone sitting in class A felony, get 5 years. It has to be something like, it's a first time offense, it's an aberration of lifestyle, it's already police, made efforts to atone for the crime, those kind of things. Then you see those. And then somebody like that, would not require a lot of movement. Well, it's feasible if the person is out at 5. You gotta remember too, HPA sets a minimum term for punishment, but also they take into consideration pre-sentence credits already there, so they can allow the person to go through this phasing process, program. Otherwise, they're gonna come up with parole and not programs, even if they started out on day 1. So all these things, see, that's the beauty of the system. I think there's a lot of nuances that's taken into consideration where something like this may not be there.
So, and by the way, in any other state besides Hawaii, the fact that people accumulate a bunch of credit they accumulated a bunch of credit. There's no way to negate that, to take away that. Your system lets you do that, but it's very unusual that you can just say that all that, you're essentially wiping away the fact that they've got that credit
Well,
by
that credit,
extending the minimum
but
to
that
account.
credit is for misconduct. That credit is from time they were promoted, they didn't do what they're supposed to do, so they went back to prison. If by a judge, you can award and giving them time, giving them some deadlines.
It's time, it's credit for time locked up.
Right. So what that does though, if I mentioned it before, we have people who come in who are sentenced to a 5-year Class D felony offense on probation. We'll see them in year 8 finally, but they got resentenced because they keep getting resentenced, probation, resentenced. They finally
try to get you thinking about the positive aspects of just setting the minimums with statute instead of having to go through this hearing process. It seems to me that's a simple solution that cures some issues. But go to the next slide. If you just fix the minimums by statute, some reference to the maximum, some percentage or some number of years that is keyed off of the maximum. At the time of sentencing, the victim knows when that first juncture is going to be. That gets at Andrew's issue. Victim knows it's going to be, it's 20 years for sure, 20 years that could happen, and X amount that absolutely is going to happen. It would be that certainty. And then, you can put it on your calendar. It's the person's going to be up for parole and whatever number of years. I know that. I don't have to wait for you when there's going to be a bill. The person themselves would hear not just that maximum number, that's my God, I'm gonna do 10 years. They would hear, what's my target? What should I be trying? If I have any motivation at all to get out of this lifestyle, what is the minimum? What's the number that I'm shooting for? So I can advocate for myself to get into programs to do what I need to do to show the parole board that I've changed. I think there's a right to a jury issue here. It cures that. No question. It's just setting the minimums by statute. And any of these delays from interplay with the courts, the Corey example in the mock hearings that happens, I'm sure there's some people that goes away. There's no reason to interplay with the courts. The courts are announcing you have a 5-year maximum and an X amount. That's it. So simplifies the work. There's no more minimum hearings. Simplifies the court's work, the AG's office, prosecution defense, all the players that are involved in this minimum setting process and in litigating the minimum setting process. That all goes away. I think when Tommy and I talked about this, we pointed out rightly that so the minimum hearings constitute about 16% of the case numbers that the HPA brings, but anecdotally, and I believe it, it's more like a third of the workload. And if we say, okay, you don't have to do that anymore, then what is the legislature do? Of course, I myself, we would be advocating that this is not a cost saving exercise. There is some efficiency here, but it's not cost saving. But the other part of that time is that this moves HPA work from minimum setting to parole release. Any number that we pick, that you all pick, that is a fixed minimum, is probably going to be lower than what's happening now, which is 50, 60, 70%. It probably needs to be lower than the minimum for a repeat offender, because that's already on the books and it's 33%. And if you go above that, it defeats the purpose of having that repeat offender mandatory. But it simplifies things. It makes it more transparent, more predictable what's going to happen. Getting at the public defenders issue, number 5 here, go through the RAD process straight to, is it IPP? Is that the acronym that you all use? You can move people more quickly into the program if it makes sense for their sentence, right?
Well, right now, we do the assessment, we just don't start until we get that on the company.
Right. So that, whatever that delay is, that goes away, or at least potentially goes away, assuming resources are at this. And this was, again, I thought a very good point of the public response.
But don't assume though, that delay, between the time the person is sentenced and the minimum hearing, will make it bad and things go away, because no. We're dealing with offenders who sometimes are shocked. These guys aren't ready on day one. Even the grant process. So that if we have 6 months to set the minimum term, right now they're doing it probably in 2.5 months for the order. So that's actually pretty good. So from the day of the minimum term hearing, the person is eligible to participate in the grant program. Again, not everybody is ready to do the program.
I thought RAD happened first.
Oh, RAD happens first. So it's all done, but they don't go into the program.
Right.
Until we figure out this, so we know which ones are going to be.
So it's probably not a huge saving in time, but it is some saving. I would say that it's bound. There's no wait. You know the minimum. no reason to wait.
But the concern is you take the victims out of the process.
Different issue, yes.
Here before the board and pleading their case as to the loss that for whatever happened to them, or the felony that they killed or severely injured. So then you're taking the victims and the community voice out of the minimum term process, which frankly, I could not support.
You're also taking the defendants. I mean, even though you choose a lower percentage of mandatory minimums, there's going to be defendants who say, I deserve something even lower. And so you're shutting those people out too. If you do it just by computer and just say, pick a number, but you're gonna shut out people on both sides.
We're not talking about doing something by computer, so let's not resort to that. I mean, this is, there's nothing illegitimate about the idea that, society has to decide all these offenses have a 5-year maximum, and all these other offenses have a 10-year maximum. There's nothing illegitimate about saying that anyone who commits one of those 5-year offenses absolutely has to serve 2 years, let's say. There's nothing wrong with that. Lots of states do it. You do it. It's the most common feature in the system. So let's not delegitimize it as an approach. It's not saying your computer did it. It's saying your legislature, as a matter of policy, just like they said 5 years is the maximum for all these offenses, they can say, I'm suggesting we probably think about saying, there's a minimum. The minimum is this. And let's go to the next slide.
Actually, I wanted to say something about including this as a plus for victims. I think that setting a low minimum that doesn't include, like you say, the voice of victims in the process. And in the handout that we got that said, this is good for victims, is they'll be able to speak at the parole hearing. Victims can attend, but specifically cannot speak at the hearing that you said that they would have an opportunity to participate in. So really I think one of the most significant way stations in the process for victims and in front of, an organization that I can, what we hear all the time, we feel very broad, is erased by this process. So I think maybe correcting that on that handout too.
Well, first of all, it doesn't say speak. It says provide key opportunity for
so that they cannot speak.
Well,
I guess the value that I think we think that victims find in the ability to do that, and taking away what they have as a right to do that, I think is something that we can consider.
I understand that, and I anticipate that. Victims in Hawaii have one more opportunity to influence parole than everyone because of the way that it works out. Just to be clear, in all the states that don't have parole at all, there's no opportunity. In 33 other states that have parole, every state I've ever counted, including Hawaii, there's an opportunity for victim input on the parole instances. It probably could be better. I agree with you. The statute doesn't call for allowing victim. It doesn't say the same thing in the release decision as it says in the
I'm just saying your proposal takes away. That's my point. Whether or not what anybody else does, what it takes away is something that is happening.
But just to point out, this doesn't have to be an absolute. What I'm referring to is the default fixed minimum. So let's say the minimum is 33%. I'm suggesting to you that lower than 33% would make sense because of the existing laws, because of the repeat offender mandatory.
Carl, would you be saying for class A's then that are currently 20, it would be like 7?
Well, I'm not saying anything about that. That's why I keep saying X. I think y'all really need to think, if there's any traction to this idea at all, the conversation should be about, should it be different for classes? Should it be different when people rack up criminal history? That's where I would like the conversation to go. If there's any reason to think to talk seriously about this, but if I may, let's say we're talking about it, and we could make it so that there's some individualization possible. If the default minimum is just too darn low for an individual case, and there are factors like putting an elderly person or a hate crime or whatever it is, the judicial process is when that can be increased. Constitutionally, those kinds of factual determinations that should increase the minimum punishment should be done as part of judicial sentencing, just like they do now for extended sentences. There's a process on the books for increasing the maximum because of the way the person committed the offense and the fact that there are multiple offenders, et cetera. That same process would be imported into the default minimums construct. And if there's a reason for the prosecutor and the judge and everybody to feel like this needs more punishment, there's a mechanism to do it in the courts. There's also the potential that the default minimum could be reduced by the HCR. I'm not sure this really comes in necessary because of something I'm gonna say, but there's no reason that that feature has to be taken away from the HCR. The HCR might want to continue to have the ability to reduce the default minimum based on a set of factors. And that would need to be approved if that was something that.
And right now, Carl, you look at the more sensitive guidelines, it takes into account, repeat offender. It takes into account the crime against an elderly, disabled person or a child. So if those things are already there, the APA can reduce the minimum terms that they accept. Well, why recommend change? Because I don't think there's any prosecution. I'm not a criminal investigation, but I have faith in the EPA's ability to set minimum terms that they feel are appropriate based on individual cases where you have individual circumstances of those cases. The blanket setting of minimum terms at a certain level doesn't take into account the nuances of that particular case. Doesn't take into account that the person might have committed this crime 15 times, at 15 convictions. How many times have you guys read the paper and you see where somebody finally gets arrested and they got 72 arrests and 40-something convictions in this finish? This would appear to, if the task was adopted, this would appear to, I think, harm our system. I'm not trying to fix it. But go ahead.
I would also say that if you're going to individualize the process this way, you're taking away the certainty for victims and defendants that you offered as a basis for imposing the statutory minimum. And you're also not going to release it. Because every time you start tinkering or offering an opportunity to go up or down, that gives the defendant an opportunity to make it.
Well, going up would be a decision made by people other than the defendant, obviously, the prosecutors and judges thinking this in the judicial process.
Yes, but
But the idea, well, you're convincing me that allowing the default minimum to be reduced by these is maybe not a good idea, but there's another reason why I think that, and that is unless you all pick numbers for the minimums that pretty much mimic what the HPA is doing, which again are very high minimums, 50, 60, 70% of the maximum. You pick 40% or 30%. The first time the person comes up for parole, they're going to see the HPA. I think we should do more to make sure the victims have a role in that juncture. And that's probably not going to be the last time it's right. They're going to see the HPA and that opportunity for interaction and interplay that's valuable in the system. It's kind of uniquely Hawaii takes on with that eligibility. The paroling authority is talking to the person. They're saying, we're not going to let you out today, but like Corey was describing, if you finish this program, we want to see you in 6 months. So you got to do this, and we're going to see you can have that kind of dialogue and interaction with people in prison. That is a valuable piece of what you do now, but it would start with a set minimum. So everybody knows what the deal is going to be until that time is.
And Carl, I would think the judges, unless there's a mechanism for them not to give any jail or prison, are going to fight this. Because a lot of our judges don't want to send me to prison or jail. I mean, the guy stole $400,000. The athletic director, what, Ilivani or something.
yeah,
He didn't get any jail at all. $400,000.
What is that? I don't understand what you're saying. Why would they fight fixed minimums because of?
Because they have to send them to prison. They don't want to do that.
They would not, this is not saying that everyone has to go to prison. Where does it say that?
If you're saying the presumptive sentence is a third
The percentage that is for someone going to prison is a fixed minimum, that's all. This is not affecting the in-out decision at all. It's just, what the judge would say is, you're getting a 5-year sentence and the minimum is 2 years, 2.5 years, or whatever. That's what the judge would do. They still not have a lot of discretion because it's really just the in-out decision they're making. But they've, instead of announcing one member, they'd be announcing 2 members. And I don't see why they insist that.
Well, they might not, but that part of it we would exist. Because of, in some cases, it should be a number of years in prison, just for safety, because we're looking at the priors in many cases, and I think
And
that, which is what.
well, that's one reason why you think about setting these default minimums. Not at a uniform level, not 25% for everybody, but start at 25%, ratchet up to repeat offenses, and ratchet up by level. There's, you know, it could be more nuanced than a uniform percentage for everybody.
Right, but that would be argument on our part, the judge would make the call as to what the minimum.
No, it would be in statute. We would debate it as a, we're talking about debating what it should be in statute, but then it's in statute, that's it. It's not a judge decision.
No, I mean to increase it.
Oh, allowing the default minimum to be, yeah, that would be like an extended sentence situation, like that scenario, which would be unusual. But it would be possible.
So what you're saying is the judge could sentence someone to probation or sentence them to 5 years, right? Convict them and say, either you go to probation, you don't go to probation, this is your presumptive minimum. That's what you're saying? It's prison. Right, there's nothing wrong with it.
But as Judge Al pointed out, most judges don't want to make that decision, so they won't make that decision.
It's not a decision for the judge. The judge is making an in-out decision. That's it. That's all they do.
So when they're going to object to this opposition, this idea, because they don't want to even touch that. They don't even.
And if they do, I think they're gonna want the discretion to determine what.
I would think the judges would
amendments
reject
would
the
be.
5, 10, and 20 as the maximum. They just bring up sending people to prison. Why don't they fuss about that? This is just saying that everybody who gets that offense has to serve at least X amount. I honestly don't understand what judges would involved with that.
Sorry, just a second, judges object to the having to make the decision on the minimum.
No, well, having to accept, say, if I'm gonna give this guy 5 years, he's gonna have to do the statutory minimum is 2 years. And I have no say in that. I can reduce it.
I'm not saying the HPM decision, and it's a mystery. It's like, we're sending them to prison, I don't know what's gonna happen.
And some people, and some judges like that. They don't wanna even touch that issue. They just wanna-
They're not really touching it by announcing a number. They're announcing 5, they'd be announcing 2.
Yes. Listen, other judges in other states, I think would be all that we're sitting here talking about. Judges don't want to make decisions. That's their job. I'm sorry, and I'm not coming out this from nothing. And I grew up the son of a Superior Court judge in Arizona. I've talked to him about what we're doing. I mean, I understand our system is different. I've heard from the judges too that, but come on, this is the job. You hold public office. You make calls. I think one of the things that needs to be discussed here, you know, and I was bothered by the last session, was the fact that the HPA said they don't recognize or consider the positions of the judges in the setting of minimum at all. I mean, Ben and I talked about the instances where he's, you know, gotten a recommendation from a judge in the transcript that he's given to the panel. I gave the examples that I had, and they were crystal clear. No, don't even look at it, don't even consider it. I think at Judgetown, who I love, his line was, stay in your, they need to stay in their lanes.
And he doesn't even think they should say.
Yeah, which is interesting. But, you know, I mean, I think, Carl, I appreciate what you put together here, and I would, you know, I would stress, I think, the importance of the mandate we've been given by the legislature and the need to discuss and consider from this point of view, can we improve the system? We don't have to come away with this saying we have to keep it the way it is, or we have to give the judges all the power. But what can we talk about to perhaps improve the system? What's the pie in the sky for victims? What's the pie in the sky for Tommy? What's the pie in the sky for prosecutors? And we're not all gonna get that. But what pieces can we get? How can we use this process and what the legislature has asked us to do to improve the system? Provide Tommy with more money for programming, right? To give victims more of a voice and more certainty. And I think we need to open up the discussion a little bit in that way. So, sorry.
And, thanks you guys, everybody for the input at this point. I think he has about 5 more minutes.
I'm done.
Okay, done. Good. I want to take a break. 10-minute break at that, because we're kind of behind it on the agenda schedule. Keep the thoughts in your mind, but let's go take a break, have some, use the restroom, have some mini discussions, and we'll be back. Right now, it's 11:10, and I'll call you also back by 11:20. So, thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah. Give us some.
Yeah, I know. Someone probably got it here.
John.
Over here.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think who would be in favor of getting a all of this. SBJ, we're all done. Prosecutors. We did a police push on things. Ended up making 13 offers, hired 3 out of 40. One's a day, but not only do we have offers, well, the possibility that help people right? You know, that is today. Love to do it. 3 to 5 years, as they sail off into the sunset of retirement, right? But there's no possibility. But I was talking to Paul Greenwood about it, and so Paul Greenwood is a retired DA in San Diego that helps us spend 40 hours elder abuse is what we're about something online. And so reciprocity. So the residents only. Right, so there would be a process to waive in. You want to go with a prosecutor. The understanding that I think some states will be similar to the state, you can only waive it for 5 years. Why? But others, you know, you waive in for the purpose of working in specific areas. The understanding that if you ever resign that office or don't stay within that particular area, guess what? You got sick. You just think about that.
We'd have to think about it. I have one concern is that and I'm set up a salary structure based on the bargaining for scientists, sheriff, oversight. And I'm afraid we would not be able to pay these guys mainly, you know, because people ask us, hey, I'm special. Pay me more than the salary structure. No.
But you're just talking about waiting, I mean, then you just won't be required to refund. This is such a.
It could be
No, I agree. I'm just saying they would not be capped. That would, you know, it wouldn't hurt us. It would help you.
But we have so much expensive. I mean, I think, Alden and I was negotiating, had it. You want all of my, you wanted to basically be the third highest person in the office. We give people, what we do. But, you know,
Yes.
Did you go to the Big Island?
No, you didn't go there either. You didn't go there either.
That is the problem that they're not bars. Provided they're scheduled to take the bar, but what if it has? Yeah.
Right. We've done. I got that too. Yeah, I got too much work. In the bar.
Then what?
Yeah. But, you know, what is
An
it?
interesting idea.
Yeah, it's on the state side.
Yeah.
They say, people are concerned that some offices might hire people. I guess it was just for. I'm trying to think.
But, you know, the hard attorney. I think it's written in page.
Yes.
How to meet certain requirements,
Yes, generally.
whatever it is, right? And if there's no concern, obviously, you don't want anyone to action or anything like that, right? But that would be something that we explore for any.
Yeah, it's not.
In my view, the law.
Yeah.
Part of, law, so if you restrict.
Not to me.
Okay, yeah, then it's very,
Right.
Oh, good to see you.
Yeah.
So that's why.
You know, I can't just come here, work for 5 years and then go out as a vice president. Do something else. Guess what? Yes, I'm just sitting here past the bar, right? Yeah.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
We have the red
What
light.
it goes on, I like something, you know, and maybe take from other jurisdictions. You know, I thought it would be more impactful. From me. All right, whatever. You know, but. Yeah, that's good.
We're also trying, do you have, we have law students who prosecuted. Right? And so what we're gonna try to do is.
Oh, we're already doing it. We just had our first law clerk try case this week.
So what has to change?
Oh, it's already set.
Yeah.
Who said you go?
No, is that right? But. I thought there were. hurdles to get through.
Well, you gotta apply to the Supreme Court. Have them sworn in.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce myself.
File the document from the supervisor saying.
Yeah, well, we're subscribed to this.
Right.
That's,
Yeah.
that's.
The seatbelt case. You can use the file. Yeah. You only send your emails.
Yeah, that's, we have 14 lockers.
Yeah.
Some do, but some don't.
Right, they said it's on site. They all said, all this. it's a good spot right now where I am. I don't want to change my environment. We're all for it, right?
So then you're like, okay, like, before, say,
Yes.
maybe that's something to just keep
Were you describing right here?
I was like, oh, is that in fact that board?
I think that's talking about me.
No, we had like, like, I've been through so many.
Yeah, I bet.
It was like, there was that one.
Well, that's an interesting idea.
Al Beaver and they were like, they were the ones, just because they would get so big, like he would just. He tried this like, it was almost like a coach thing, because he was a football coach. Right? He was like, when he almost got one of my clients killed, because we did a hearing, and it was kind of making nuts. So he goes outside, you guys are making. So the rest of you guys, yeah, all in trouble for the rest of the day. That guy pissed me off.
Really?
I mean, I didn't think that it was, like, probably not, we did that.
Yeah, I didn't hear, I didn't know that, but they said you got orders.
Yeah, but I did, and decided to, like, I mean, I thought always that him and Fred were really close. But you know, would be like, why are you letting him do this? Why didn't you say this? So, I mean, it's very serious. That's how I was trying to say, because it's hard, because if we have some idea, some certainty, it's easy to work on, especially, I mean, the big murders, the guys who are like third, those guys are pretty much gonna be tried. But, some of the other ones.
One thing I see in war that really help is have
This is Thursday sport, but yeah. But you know what, the good part is sitting county, if they're under 18,
there's
they
one
play.
person who adopted
The
a
hard part is they keep them. City
But
county.
so it's that's fighting section
Oh,
that they work.
every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of accumulating all these things,
You get a really
it doesn't
one
serve the inmate well when you accumulate all these points. Just give them the punishment and you've done, right? So. We're sitting right on. It's like. Talking about these programs.
Kind of, I mean.
Anytime I'm sure.
They don't have representation. A lot of the guys, dispute, and like, and then you bring too, because you get multiple. Like it's very bad orders. So there's a bunch of, so you look at them, and there are points where you say, so yeah, and it stays with them, so.
It stays with them so long. And the thing is that it's kind of an artificial environment. Just because there's all this fighting. Doesn't mean that that's how they act on the outside.
Whatever the heck it is.
Yeah.
Involved in other things so that they don't, they're not.
Yeah, no, I think the program, I mean, that's kind of all of us. Giving a crisis program. Because like guys, yeah. That's just stuff like, you know, that dog training thing.
Yeah.
That's why I think those things are good. We can give them like positive kind of focus on me, but it's just that there's so many.
Yeah, I know. Like, they said it 1%. They had a.
No, that's the only.
Yeah, I'm just. The dog would just sleep next to them and all that.
Yeah, no,
That's really neat, but it's just all the.
He's good right now.
Are your knees blocking us?
yeah. I'm doing back to back. What he's supposed to say, well, I want to put it, but he does have.
So, you know, it's not just.
Mhm.
So.
Or not?
That's really what, you know.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean possible. It's not weird.
Yeah.
But we have an anxious sign because we know that there's a very time.
Here, can we in the hallway?
Bigger than me.
Yeah.
So you have one better. We started using that.
That's
Yeah, back in the
just wanted to see.
But he understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just had to check with you.
It was very unique. All the players. As they might.
You could have support.
Yeah.
Stop doing that now, just do HR, budget. Like, do something nice.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
You know.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of like, I mean,
golf course, I'm over there, golf course. Are we all back?
all the other person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes what we're saying is like, he said everything.
Is it just a technical check? Keldon, can you hear me? Or Miles? Was that Joseph? Yeah. Sonoy? Okay, thank you. Keldon and Miles, I'm not at all.
Yeah, that's
Okay, just want to make sure that we heard. That they heard. Oh, hey, Keldon, can someone speak so I know that our audio is working?
Testing 1 2, testing 1 2.
Thank you. I want to make sure that you guys are a part of the discussion as well, so. We're all back in the room. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carl, for that presentation. Appreciate it. Really understanding, like we in Hawaii, we asked someone from the national to come and give us their perspective from their experiences in working in the other states. And basically, that's what we heard. It's an assessment from his point, comparing us to what's happening and what he sees happening here, and then giving some feedback to us. What has been presented is really, like I said in the beginning of the meeting, just a molded clay. Yeah, it's not set in stone, but it's really understanding a point of, or points that we can have discussions on that may, and that can be fleshed out and this may morph into something different. Yeah, or added, some things can be added, some things can be deleted. That's what the discussion is for. It's not meant to replace what's happening right now, but to get everyone's input to figure out, can we build something that can be agreeable to everyone in the different points of the system. Yeah, so I wanted to make that clear. Now, we have some things that I want to bring up in terms of where we are. The discussion was great. Appreciate everybody and what you had to say. And it kind of gives us an understanding that we may not be where we want to be at this particular point in time in the task force's mandate. Okay, August 1st is a legislative timeline for some kind of recommendation. And what that recommendation is, we're not sure yet. So one of the things that we're thinking about doing at this particular point in time is really listening to all the concerns that we have, and the commission staff will look at it and try to put it together in some kind of format for us to look at again. And understand that, you know, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about may or may not have the appropriate data. Yeah, or we may have to go look for data to confirm. Any policy recommendation to the legislature should have the data to back it up. Yeah, and so, Aaron, can you speak a little bit to that in terms of data and what you heard today?
Sure.
Thank you.
So just so you know that as you know, we're partnering with CSG on some of the data analysis, and really grateful for their assistance because a significant amount of time is collecting the data. As I mentioned, there were a lot of file reviews that were done. And I kind of bring up that point to say that one of the limitations to data in the task force is that a lot of the really in-depth question and sort of follow-up questions that really dig into the why of a lot of trends is not the type of data you can really pull and analyze very quickly. But with that being said, there is some data that's being collected and analyzed at this time. I don't have exact I need to check with CSG before kind of promising when that will be ready to share. But with that being said, I think another thing that through all of this, why I'm really, I think it's really helpful to have CSG here is that you have your local data and you want to analyze trends and add follow-up questions. You see some metrics, for example, or trends over time, and you kind of look into those. Maybe those result more questions, more data, more research. But one thing that's also helpful is just to look at kind of nationally what's going on and what you see nationally in different states or different jurisdictions. And it doesn't, maybe there's, I think one of the questions at the beginning that was asked, is there an effective sentencing system? Is there a best practice sentencing system? And I think there's no one exact solution. There's a lot of goals and priorities to balance, but when you look nationally, you kind of just see what's going on and look relative to what you're doing to maybe, ask yourselves questions internally, or maybe lead to additional data that needs to be looked at that you haven't thought about. So since you handed me the floor for a second, I just wanted to reiterate that, I'm very grateful that CSU has been able to help, through bringing a lot of this information about what other states are doing to the table, just to add to that discussion while data is being analyzed and some information there. So I don't, does that help with an update, or if there's kind of additional follow-up questions at this time, or, but it will be part of, the next discussion, so.
So looking at the agenda, it seems like there needs to be a recommendation that happens before our next meeting to the Legislative Reference Bureau about, I guess that's about findings regarding HCR 23. So that's on the agenda, right? Is that it's as the outcome. So that essentially it would be the time to express people's sentiments, the direction, because the ultimate question really is who is the most appropriate agency, or the group to set the limits. Is it the controlling authority or judges? Or basically the controlling authority. So is that your understanding too? Is that the resolution requires us to forward as a group recommendation to the Legislative Reference Bureau by that date?
There needs to be, a recommendation given to the legislature, yes.
But isn't that if we want new legislation?
Yes.
Or, so if some of us think the Paroling Authority is in the best position to do this, then we don't send anything.
Yeah.
To the LRB. But we-
Well, or we tell them what our recommendation is, that we're sending the recommendation out.
Okay, but there are going to be more discussion about how to improve the current system, maybe the classification or whatever, so it's not.
Well, we have like an hour before, like, this is our last meeting before this is.
And what can we do is, what the suggestion was gonna be is that we schedule a July meeting. Yeah, because we don't really have enough information to make an informed decision. Yeah, and really, what we presented today, like I said, is the mold. We really want to mold it up. We haven't had a discussion to mold it up. So we may not accomplish what we mandated to accomplish in the time period given. So the legislative ask may be for an extension.
I think though that it could be that, that people feel that they have enough information to make a decision because of, you know, the information they already have about how the Paroling Authority works and the nature of the recommendations. So, I know I was gonna make a motion about what I thought the final outcome should be, but maybe it's better to make a motion before that to say, are the majority of people who feel like they have enough information right now to make the recommendation?
And what is the information based on?
The information is based on these discussions and the information that we have, and the reason why we were selected
Yeah,
to be on and appointed by the legislature to make this decision.
Maybe we should go around the room and have people give what their opinions are without a vote. I think, before.
now I'm willing to do that.
So we know.
Really, the best way to make a decision is to have a data in front of you. Yes, you are experienced with this, and we've talked a lot about numbers, but we haven't seen a formalized data.
So,
Right.
what data are you looking for? I guess the question would be, what data are you gonna get at a July?
Not much.
So actually, then I'd like to make a motion for, just so we can resolve this question. Do the majority of people feel like they have enough information to make a recommendation at this point during this meeting, based on what they know or what they've heard or what they have not heard? Results of the lack of data.
Absence another presentation or recommendation for a different route. I think I have enough information to make a recommendation, how I think.
Yes.
Well, I'm gonna ask Caroline.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring a bigger perspective. So the commission is situated where we look at things system-wide, and one of the specific parts of our mandate is to facilitate a systemic transition to a therapeutic model of corrections. And so when I think of that, and that was given to us from the legislature, but it also is a system-wide look. It really requires, the way that we look at things is different. It's a perspective shift. And so what I want to say here is, even if we land, wherever we land, it's an opportunity to look at the system differently. It's an opportunity to look at your roles differently, but in a way where, how can we be better? Like, how could we help the Maui prosecutor's office? How could we help each different system? Like, really thinking of it as an opportunity to create something greater. So maybe we don't land on this legislation or this legislation, but there's a really big opportunity here in this task force. You know, we have the governor's priorities on board too. He's really thinking about this, that we have legislative support. So it's almost like a perfect storm is lining up for us to create something new, or for us to further what we want for our own roles and also system-wide. So why I'm concerned if we just take a vote and move forward, like, I want to think about what Carl shared today. I want to think about what everyone shared today and have some time to process it. Does that mean I'll necessarily get more data? I'm not sure, but I just want to be able to consider different things that I hadn't necessarily thought of.
I think that, like, the question is something else, and I understand what you're saying, but I also know that the legislature through HCR 23 mandated a group to address certain issues and mandated a specific group to be able to vote on these issues. And so I'd like to finish what we started, which was keep asking people, are they ready, or do they have enough to vote at this point in time, which is what we're in the middle of.
You know, my opinion, I would like some time to look at Carl's report before actually committing to a position. I mean, if it's just parole board or no parole board, I mean, I would vote no parole board at this point just because I think there are better systems. But I mean, if I look at this and there is no, this system that's proposed and there is no better one, then I might have to just stay with the status quo and work to improve that. Like, for instance, recommending that, Tommy's department get more funding, so at least it's more effective. But I mean, that's just where my position right now.
And I'll go around the room, Tommy.
Oh, I think I believe I have a recommendation on the vote. So,
I have no.
And
No, I think if we vote at this point, you look at the mandates. One of them is to examine and make recommendations. I don't know what we've examined. I think we've gotten a lot of information. But I agree that, there is an opportunity here to discuss whether or not we can improve the system. And I think, without giving ourselves the opportunity to do that, we're missing. This is not gonna come around again. So what's the harm in continuing to discuss it? I do not have enough information. And I would say, I came into this thinking that I was with an open mind. I'm thinking that I was more on the lines of I wanted the judges to have more of a say in setting minimum. Throughout this discussion, I'm less certain of which way we need to go than I was the first day I came in here. I don't think it's that way for everybody. But I think we need to open to our minds to what are the opportunities here for each of us in the role that we have within the system, because there's opportunities for everybody. And most importantly, the opportunity is to shape a better system. And if we're just gonna say, hey, look, I'm good with the way it is, we're not doing, I'm gonna say, don't do squat. Man, what a squandered opportunity. So I don't have it.
Right, but are you agreeing that it has to be made next month? Because, I mean, if that's what the call is.
I think it'll be a decision on what the recommendation.
I mean, the advantage to that is it gives people time to think about it. I'd really like to go in the room and have people give what their opinion is and why, because there may be things I haven't heard of. But we have to make a call. So as long as everybody can show up at the next meeting to make that vote, and I don't even know if we have all the voting members here today. But
We'll continue to go around the room, Corey.
Well, I mean, I can't vote for Fred. I'll just speak on my own behalf. I think I'm kind of for the system, but I'm also for we could probably tweak it a little bit as well. Right, but I'm not, and by no means speaking on Fred, our chairman.
Thank you, Corey.
I'm looking at the time frame too, and feeling really like we're so far behind where we could be, but we got the presentation. There's so much discussion and concern about some of the stuff in it, that the constitutional issues, that we can't even agree on that on what the presentation, is as an underlying foundation for what we're going to decide. So I think I have enough information. And in part that's because we don't have any time, because we are here right now. Without having set meetings in a way that would lead us to be able to make recommendations in the time that the resolution requires us to. But I have enough information, and like I said, I understand what you're saying. But that seems like the boat sail in terms of what we're required to do under instruction timeline.
Okay, well, sorry, I'm gonna speak more from a layperson standpoint about this, but certainly we have a lot of information that's been presented, thanks to you folks and into the good discussions. So throughout this, I was using the timeline that we had to make some decision today because something was going to LRB. So I spent a lot of time looking at everything. And from listening, I'm really at the point of believing that Hawaii actually has a unique system, but that is more geared to both community safety
victim input and even offender care, thinking through for offenders. Because it goes individual by individual case in that way, for the most part. I get there are some things that are said. But basically what I heard throughout is that maybe a review of guidelines to update them for setting the minimum. You know, I don't know about the parole piece, but setting the minimum, I could see more input for victims, making it more money to make sure there's the ability for victims to participate. So a staff person that focuses only on that, that's of course an ideal. The other thing I think we all maybe would agree on is that programs, rehabilitative programs, everybody, I have to say, I think I've been to the legislative session where they ask for it, it doesn't happen. So both inside the prison and outside of the community. So, but I don't think anybody would be opposed to that. But I'm really not seeing how, you know, having a legislature decide the minimum is going to be better for victims. I don't see that, or for community safety. So I don't see how moving it to the judges would be better for victims. And so other than needing community education more about how sentencing works and minimum, which maybe could address the community advocates' concerns. I think I have enough information. I'm not sure what else you could provide. You've told us about many states. You've broken case law, which, you know, anyway, you've done a lot of information, and I just don't see what else you could add to make a change. What I do see, this little concerning to me, is that because there was all those articles in the beginning, it kind of seemed like there was a preset notion of how we were going to go or how we should go. Do you remember the article civil deed? I don't know who else had it, but it was already saying HPA bad. And so I kind of came in wondering about that myself, but because I don't know where those articles came from or how they happened. I don't know. Anyway, so I have to say, I felt like I came into this with an open mind because it sounded to me like it was really bad. We're the only one in the country that has this. And so I can see where tweaking is needed to make sure it's updated for how things are now in our world. But other than that, I think I have enough information. Oh, I'm not, it will be my first, so I don't.
Well, I have enough information, I think, but because I have concerns about the legislature setting the statutory minimum. And I have concerns about it. I know you said it's statutory, but the judge is going to make the call on what the minimum is. If they're going to send them to prison, and we think their record is bad, the judge might say, I don't think it's that bad. So I'm going to keep it at, I'm going to send them to prison, but the statutory minimum is going to be 5 years, and the Paroling Authority can increase that. And I think this guy's a huge danger to the public. It should get like a 15-year on a class A. But it's going to be the judge who decides that, what the minimum is, right?
Understand what you- The idea is to set the minimum as a proportion of the maximum in statute. That is not a judicial decision.
Right. So say it's a third. So on an armed robbery, it's 7 years out of 20. And then the judge is going to decide to go up or not.
If there's aggravating circumstances in the full booking of the process that you have to do for an extended sentence, that would make that a possibility. The idea of a default is that could be, that wouldn't be the norm. It wouldn't be the judges set the minimum every single time. It's in
It would
statute.
happen a lot.
I don't agree, but I mean, the judges, how much does extended sentencing happen? That's kind of a process hassle. And but it's indicated by those factors, criteria like hate crimes.
Right, so that's number to be rare.
Well, I'm suggesting that that's gonna be the same. It's the same issue. It's what circumstances should increase the minimum, but the judges aren't gonna be routinely setting minimums because the minimum is in statute as a default.
Okay, and to me, for certain crimes, a third is not enough.
Well, you just made up a third and then said it's not enough. You're posing a hypothetical and saying, well,
No,
that's
but the
enough.
legislature is going to set it.
And I thought that this group would suggest, here's what that should look like. That's good. like they do with the field.
But that, and whatever it would be, a number of judges are gonna leave it at that. It's not gonna get higher than that.
That's the idea. It's a minimum.
Right.
Parole board doesn't have to release people with the minimum, and I don't think they will. But it gives the paroling authority that space of time. The lower the minimum is by statute, the more authority the paroling authority has to work with people and exercise, get them through the process. But it's not a judicial decision.
We still have people that are on Zoom, right? reading Zoom.
Thank you, Judge.
Can I ask
So-
a question? I will say yes, but, so Carl, I was wondering if you might be able to comment on those studies that looked at the roles on the boards across the nation. So in that study, Hawaii was ranked second top.
Everyone study.
I don't know, Tommy did or Corey.
Is that true?
I don't know what the source is, so.
I mean, I don't remember the name of the survey, but we were ranked second in the country with a C- or something.
Oh, the Prison Policy Institute. That came out several years ago. I mean, yeah, I did not place a lot of credence in that overall. They also said Wyoming is the best parole system in the country, and I was like, no.
So I was just wondering what your feeling was.
I don't have bad things to say about the paroling authority. This, for me, this did not start out HBA bad. I don't care what the press said. But I think Fred is doing good work. I think Tommy's doing good. Said that at the outset. It's not about that. It's about whether this is the best way to, I mean, to me, it's like, it's almost like simple. You don't have to go through a hearing to set a minimum. You come up with a set of minimums that feel comfortable and feel like it's enough to be a punitive approach and a retributive approach that everybody has to do this. But then the paroling authority has between that minimum and the maximum to do their thing. And I think the way they do their thing could be probably improved upon, but it's not a bad rule.
Well, the idea of having the legislatures that prescribe minimum is something that was kind of new to me. I thought that what we had to decide was whether it be with judges or with parole. That's what I had thought.
And that's
when
what
we
I've
this
noticed that all through this
legislative
process, that
thing.
everybody seems to think there's only two choices. And it's just not true. There's more than two choices. And in fact, the other choice is the one that most places do. That's why I'd say it's I mean, I know it's new to you, but for me, it's like, it's not hard to understand. It's just a different approach.
If the judge goes to the prescribed minimum, and the paroling authority will decide whether the person has been behaving in prison. And why did they
A
keep?
regular old parole release decision, like they do now. And like all other paroling authorities.
Right, but
Once
it's,
they've served the minimum, they're eligible to seek a parole board, and the parole board takes into account the things they take into account.
right, but if they don't have misconducts and other things, what is their justification for keeping them in?
Do it all the time. Sometimes they do it for, they say, you just haven't served enough time, in my opinion, for what you did. That's not supposed to be the way parole board should, but that's the way they do it. And
Don't you
sometimes
see
they say,
lawsuits flowing
if
out
it-
of that? Don't you see lawsuits flowing out of that? But the defense think they're just keeping them in there.
well, liberty, interest, and parole. Those are all the losers that they find.
Let me continue on. Hey, Keola, how you doing? You have any comments? Why?
Yes, the one data point that really stuck out for me was the increase in people maxing out. It said by 104% between 2006 and 2011. And also the 3-year rearrest rates that were almost double for those people that were released without parole supervision. I'm just really concerned that there isn't enough basically capacity for inmates to have the programming that they need so that they're not maxing out like that. And, obviously there's a lot of reasons for people maxing out, usually refusing to do programs or their own behavior. But if we do switch to something to a determinate system, and we don't have that 6-month lag before a minimum term is set, then, more programming will have to be available basically as soon as they're, at the facility. So those are my comments.
I think that was determined because some of those max outs have been previously paroled and parole revoked. They could have been suspended and brought back. They weren't incarcerated without the opportunity for release. It's just that they maxed out in prison. It could have been released to return to prison on warrant. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, no, I understand that. It just statistically stuck out, that between 2006 and 2011, that there was a 104% increase. So,
Phil, are you comfortable if we tend to take a vote on something at this time?
I would prefer to wait and make a vote at the next meeting, personally.
Phil, thank you. Kelvin?
Hello, can you hear me okay? I'd like to I think I'd like to echo some of the things that Andy mentioned earlier. We've got an opportunity here. And then, also like with I won't I'll just keep it short, but I think I'd like to wait till the next meeting as well. I think when we first started this, honestly, I was kind of the position that I thought that maybe I would like to see the judges set the man-min. And going through this process and hearing about what's happening across the continent and in other states and other jurisdictions, I'm, to be honest, a little unsure on what is the best course of action right now. I kind of am interested in the default percentage man-mins being set upon these prison type cases, but I'm just not sure where I stand right now, and I think the next hearing would be next meeting would be a good point. I'm hoping that we can make a decision at that point.
Thank you, Kelvin. Appreciate your thought. Miles, are you there? Kind of follow up on the other news that's still. Okay. So the voting members on the voting members that are currently online are Kelvin, Keola, Miles.
Is Mike still there?
She was there earlier. I don't see her right now. Tie.
When you're talking about the meeting well done, that's not till September, but you're looking at changing it to July, or adding one to it.
Oh. Okay, so that's where we are right now. Okay. Again, yeah, so we have out of 21 members that have been assigned to the commission, we have 10 that are here. So, and if that anybody has issue, I don't know if that's sufficient for quorum to make a decision.
But we're not voting, there's 21.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So
but we don't need that to extend the meeting.
no. I mean, say that again.
I said we don't need to vote to add it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so.
The suggestion is right now, and some of it, what I heard is to really, what we want to do as a commission is to really take a look at everything else said today you know, get more answers. And then, set a meeting next month. Before. July 14th. It'll look before July 15th.
I think
The 8th is a Monday. Oh, just so everyone knows, who's missing today is the Office of the Chief Justice, OHA, Director of Department of Health, attorneys from Hawaii and Maui, or representatives of the Hawaii Association, well, that's the Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys. The politicians, I'm sorry, representative, a senator, and a DOJ, and those are the guys that are not here right now. We have added to the discussion. July 8th was someone good day. If we will vote to make that, we want to say it won't, doesn't have to be in person. We want to make it available for Zoom. But yeah, I think the discussion at that point, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you hear wrong, is really to discuss what the recommendation may be and may not be, so that we can meet with the timeline. Yeah. Comments.
I have a question. Before we started, we couldn't even decide how a decision would be, whether it would be by majority vote or consensus. What's the rule on decision?
And that's normally in any kind of board or whether it's a discussion to have, if you want to have the discussion, trying to shrink it a view. But it's really where we want, we're comfortable with consensus. I don't agree with it, but I can live with it. Or I totally want to support it, or I don't. You know, that's normally how consensus is drawn. Or we take a number vote. Yeah, I prefer consensus, so that people, even if they may not agree with certain points, they have an understanding that this can develop into something that they can support later. Yeah.
I think it's straightforward, because I think also the legislative, the LRB, their suggestion was we sent different proposals. So I think that we sent a proposal and like 9 out of 21 people disagree. I think it's important for the legislature and for the LRB to understand the proposals. And it's important for the legislature to understand that there was not a consensus about such a situation. So I think everybody's vote should count for the recommendation. That's usually how.
So what is the recommendation?
So the recommendation is we vote.
Yeah, okay.
Next time.
Yeah, I'm throwing it out there. I'm throwing it out there.
Consensus, so
I don't.
I just wanted to.
Otherwise, we'll.
Two sides. Yeah. Are you okay with the answer?
No, I just wanted
Yeah, we have our work cut out for ourselves. Yeah, been a lot of great discussion here, anticipated, yeah. But again, it's really about your point in the system, your viewpoint. And for me, it's all like, and I agree with, Maui. It's also important to know, with the Big Island, Hawaii and Maui being here, to understand their jurisdictions uniqueness and their concerns, and how it may differ from, Honolulu. Yeah, so, we're gonna go ahead and, move forward with the next date. We'll be keeping, and it can be, we're gonna make it on Zoom. Yeah, and then we're gonna summarize today, summarize some next steps, and, come up with something. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But we'll stress that, but we know we're adding a meeting and people might have set schedules already. So we wanna set that out, but we want to try and outline the whole discussion so it's a little bit more convenient and easier to move the meeting along. Yeah, 9 o'clock. On that 8th morning.
Can we make it 10?
Can we take a vote? That's a good way to end, on humor and laughter. It's been a hard discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, those of you online, thank you so much for being here. We'll continue the discussion. Thank you.
You go.